Good morning. It is 7 o'clock. Coming up on today's programme, another night of sustained violence with petrol bombs thrown at police in Belfast and police hit with bricks and fireworks in Plymouth.
A former head of counter-terror policing in the UK says the worst of the rioting should be treated as terrorism, with warnings that immigration lawyers could be targeted.
Plus, water companies brace for what could be the largest ever fine issued by the regulator. We'll get the details for you in just a moment.
It's Tuesday, the 6th of August. Your headlines. In Plymouth, several police officers are injured and a police van is damaged on another night of anti-immigrant far-right violence.
How difficult is this to police tonight? Off the scale. It's off the scale today, with the resources we've got.
In Belfast's second night of violence, these rioters throw petrol bombs and missiles at police. Student protesters in Bangladesh call for Nobel Peace Prize winner Muhammad Yunus to lead the country after the Prime Minister flees. The full extent of failings and conditions at Wandsworth prison is revealed, highlighting a deeper problem with Britain's prison system. Traders take courage. Asian markets rebound after a day of sell-offs saw huge falls around the globe yesterday. A very good morning to you. Several police officers have been injured in Plymouth after being attacked by rioters last night. It marks yet another night of sustained violence after false information spread online about the Southport stabbings that sparked far-right anti-immigrant disorder. Today, a former head of the UK's counter-terror police force has said it's time to start treating the worst of the riots as terrorism. More on that shortly, but first, Dan Whitehead has the latest for us from Plymouth.
They were prepared for protest, but not on this scale. For more than 4 hours, violent clashes erupted across this city, a week on from the horrors in Southport. Community anger now being felt hundreds of miles away.
There are 30 or so riot officers on either side of this main road in the centre of Plymouth. They are doing their best to keep these two groups separate as the tension rises.
At least 1,000 protesters from Stand Up to Racism and a counter-group against immigration were behind the clash.
I think it's scary what's happening in the country. The division is awful, and I think a lot of it's perpetrated by the media, twisting things.
People can come in here and just get what pensions they like. They bring their families in. We've got a system that will take care of proper legal migrants. It's the illegal migrants that we don't want here.
As night fell, the protests got more violent. At least 3 police officers were injured. Those in charge admitting this was a difficult evening.
This is not protest anymore. In my opinion, this is violence. This is sustained violence. Unfortunately, large masonry was thrown at us. Whether it was aimed at us or others or opposing groups, we don't know yet. The investigation will identify that. But yeah, three officers down. How difficult is this to police tonight? Off the scale. It's off the scale today. With the resources we've got, it's difficult.
There were 150 officers deployed in the city, but at times it didn't feel enough. The PM's promise of a standby army didn't feel deployed here tonight. Dan Whitehead, Sky News in Plymouth.
Well, Belfast also experienced a second night of unrest. Rioters threw petrol bombs and missiles at police. The police service of Northern Ireland warned the public to stay away from some areas of the city while they dealt with public disorder and violence on the streets. Sky News teams saw around a dozen people wearing balaclavas and masks throwing petrol bombs at armoured police vehicles. Well, Mari's here to discuss the political significance of all of this. And Mari, we've had suggestions, though not confirmed, about 24-hour courts. We've had the Prime Minister, which Dan mentioned in his report there, talking about a standing army of police officers ready. Is there, though, growing pressure to see more of this delivered, and in particular funding to back up some of this firm rhetoric from the Prime Minister?
I think there's a pressure in terms of the fact that that standing army that we've heard, it sounds great, but actually, first of all, it's not the army, and that's one of the pressure points, is whether people feel that actually it's time to bring in the army if this unrest is going to continue for days and potentially weeks ahead. Also, the standing army, we already have something really quite similar already, so it's not actually as new as it might sound. We have something which is called mutual aid, where certain police officers who are trained when it comes to kind of public order, as it were, are able to be deployed to different areas and kind of hotspots. So there's not really that much of a change, but what the PM spokesperson is essentially saying is actually they can be deployed quicker than previously. So that's the kind of tweak, as it were. And I think also the pressure will come from, for instance, we saw this morning Neil Basu, who's given an interview saying that actually it's time to crack down on this like it's terrorism, that some of these acts of violence we've been seeing, especially when it comes to targeting certain groups, so Muslim groups or asylum seekers, that actually that will meet the threshold for terrorism and people should be charged with terrorism offences. Now, that is going further than what the government has done so far. So I think the pressure is also very political in terms of the way that this is being handled. We know there's also, on the other side, been accusations around two-tier policing. Nigel Farage has talked about that, for instance, and the fact that actually the police are in a really difficult position where they are criticised if they're too heavy-handed, but they're also equally criticised if they're not doing enough. And they're saying, actually, that it's really quite difficult to police this with the resources that they have.
The other debate that keeps coming up is whether Parliament should be recalled or not. I mean, on that, is what we're talking about and dealing with this sort of issue, it's purely a sort of act of the executive, not of the legislature, that would address it anyway. So is this a sort of false pressure or an unreasonable pressure, perhaps, or is it very legitimate? Because a lot of these topics need a public forum for debate where all voices get heard.
So if you speak to government sources, they will essentially explain to you that there is no need to recall Parliament. In order to give the police extra powers and certain things like that, actually, you don't need permission from Parliament. It doesn't need to be debated. So for now, it's not a necessary thing. Although you could also argue, and I think government sources would confirm this, that actually that is still being kept an eye on, and if something were needed to be debated in Parliament, or the pressure became so great from MPs, that potentially that would be on the cards. But so far, we've only had a small number of MPs calling for Parliament to be recalled, and I think that speaks to the fact that for now, people are saying, we don't need it yet, but it doesn't mean it's not a possibility in the future.
Right, Christoph, thanks so much. Well, at 8:10, we're going to be joined by the Courts Minister, Heidi Alexander, to discuss the ongoing riots and how the government plans to get people through the court system. 8:10, the Government Minister will be with us. Some breaking news. The water regulator has fined 3 companies after an investigation into sewage failings. Our business correspondent Paul Kelso's here with the details on that. So, Paul, what scale of fine are we talking about here?
Very big fines. A collective fine for 3 companies of £168 million, the biggest of which to a company we've talked about a lot, Thames Water, fined £104 million by the regulator Ofwat for failings in its management of sewage and wastewater. This has just dropped, particularly around its management of storm overflows, which we've talked about. When it rains heavily, the sewage system can't cope with the volumes. Rainwater and wastewater mixes and it flows into rivers and waterways. There's also fines of £47 million to Southern Water, previously the recipient of the biggest ever single fine of £127 million. This one for Thames doesn't quite get that high, but there's also £17 million fine for Northumbrian Water. Ofwat, I think we'll have their chief executive in a little later in the morning, see this as quite a big moment. They're actually investigating all 11 water and wastewater companies for their management of these sewage overflows. A reaction to public disgust, frankly, at what has been, we now know has been going into rivers and waterways. This is part of a process. Ofwat doesn't do anything very quickly. These are proposed fines. The companies have a chance to come back. These fines and this action has been welcomed this morning by the Environment Minister. interesting in the wider context of the water industry, particularly Thames Water, in huge financial trouble, debt-laden, struggling to find a business plan, struggling to find anyone who wants to invest in the company to try and clean up its act, literally and metaphorically. If this fine was being levied today, one has to ask the question whether it would have the cash.
Just quickly on the point you said, these things all take quite a lot of time. Were we expecting news of this fine to come out today? Was this part of the final piece of an ongoing investigation, or was it just sort of slightly out of the blue?
Ofwat talked about this investigation has been open since 2022 into 7 of the companies. Another 4 were added last month. Ofwat said they were looking particularly at these 3, Thames, Southern and Northumbrian, in December, so it has been ongoing. This announcement, though, I think the water companies were informed yesterday, and it's released this morning in line with a normal announcement ahead of markets opening, because these are potentially price sensitive. But just to sum up, Thames Water, £104 million fine for failing to manage its sewage outflows correctly from the water regulator, along with £47 million for Southern Water and £17 million for Northumbrian. So more bad news for the water industry.
Paul, great stuff. Thanks so much, Paul Kelso. By the way, the chief executive of that regulator, Ofwat, will join us at 7:45 this morning. Time now for all of the day's other top stories. Leah's got those for us.
Thank you very much, Wilfred. We were talking about the US economy yesterday, weren't we? Fears of whether it's going to head into recession. Well, markets in Asia have rebounded, and it could look as though it's heading to a worldwide recession. Let's take a look at the Asian markets. Well, Taiwan's stock exchange jumped following that record drop yesterday, but shed some of the gains later in the morning amid lingering concerns over the US economy and also tech companies. And the most dramatic recovery was Japan's Nikkei. It soared nearly 11% after it plunged by more than 12%. It's the biggest fall since Black Monday in October 1987. Well, student protesters in Bangladesh have called for Nobel Peace Prize winner Muhammad Yunus to lead the country. This is after the Prime Minister fled to Pakistan following deadly protests. Let's get more on this now with Neville Lazarus with the very latest. So Sheikh Hasina has resigned. Give us a sense of the mood today and what might happen next.
Well, it is quite fast-paced in Bangladesh. The mood is still tense because the student leaders have said they will not accept any army-led or army-formed government, which the military is very powerful in Bangladesh, but the students' movement who believe that the overthrow of the government has been because of them. They mobilized millions of people to the capital and then marched down to the Prime Minister's office and residence. The army was forced and pressurized to give her a nudge, and she resigned and fled the country. She arrived in the airbase about 20 miles from here yesterday in the evening. Her whereabouts not known yet, and there are reports that she might be flying, she might be going to Britain to seek asylum there. But nevertheless, in Bangladesh, there is quite a fast-paced political movement now. The students' union protesters who were responsible for this downfall of Sheikh Hasina have put up the name of Muhammad Yunus, who's a 2006 Nobel Peace Prize winner who revolutionized microfinance in the country, uplifting millions of people. And they've said that he would lead the government and no one else. And at the moment, the military chief is meeting the students' protesters union, and we will get to know what the decision will be. But in Bangladesh itself, there is calm on the streets. There are no more protests yet. There was a bit of looting yesterday and vandalism of the Prime Minister's residence and office, but so far it's calm on the streets in Dhaka.
Neville, thank you. A US judge has ruled Google acted illegally to maintain a monopoly on online searches. The internet giant spent billions of dollars to be the default search method on browsers and devices, and this is in violation of antitrust law. The parent company, Alphabet, says it will appeal the decision. Vice President Kamala Harris is expected to name her running mate today before an appearance with her VP pick in Philadelphia. She formally secured the Democratic presidential nomination on Monday after a virtual roll call vote. No challengers put themselves forward before the deadline. That was on the 27th of July.
And we will be discussing the latest on the US election a little bit later in the morning at 7:30. Now, the full extent to failures and poor conditions at Wandsworth Prison have been revealed. An inspection earlier this year, published this morning, lays bare the shocking conditions at the troubled facility. The government says it's acting urgently, deploying extra staff and spending millions on improvements. Sabah Chowdhury has this report for us.
Surveillance surrounds Wandsworth Prison through the all-seeing gaze of CCTV. But behind these walls, the cameras capture a story of decline and decay. Mouldy walls, damaged furniture in cells, potential mouse droppings in the kitchen, and dead rats indoors. A catalogue of failures, according to a damning report by the Chief Inspector of Prisons.
Yeah, we went into Wandsworth Prison at the end of April. And I have to say, I was really shocked by what I saw walking around the jail. It was one of the most depressing inspections that I've ever been involved in. We saw prisoners locked behind their door for up to 22 hours a day. Staff and prisoners just didn't know when they were going to be unlocked. We smelt cannabis everywhere around the prison. And there was just a lack of leadership, really, at every level.
Last year, there was a national manhunt after ex-soldier Daniel Khalif allegedly escaped by the underside of a van. And despite the high-profile incident, the report claims prison staff still fail to keep track of when inmates leave their cells.
Sentences have just got longer and longer and longer.
Prison reform groups are calling for drastic change.
And these are prisons that are 170, 200 years old. A prison like Wandsworth needs a significant amount of money and a significant number of people taken out of it. People go to prison for an increasing catalogue of offences and then they don't leave. So we have this burgeoning prison population.
Well, the government says it's on the case and will deploy extra specialist staff and £100 million worth of funding to help deliver these urgent improvements. But if that's enough remains another question. Clearly, the scale of the problem with our prisons is one of many in the new government's intro. Sabah Chowdhury, Sky News.
President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris have been told by their national security team it's still unclear when Iran and Hezbollah are likely to launch an attack against Israel or what such an attack would look like. Let's discuss the very latest in the situation in the Middle East now with the former British ambassador to Libya and Jordan and High Commissioner to Cyprus, Peter Millett. Thanks so much for joining us this morning. What is your assessment in terms of the likelihood of, A, this sort of response that's been alluded to by US security services, and B, what it might do to the potential for a broader Middle East conflict?
I think the risk is high at the moment. The risk of miscalculation is high. I think the effect on the region and on the world would be catastrophic. I can see plenty of calls for de-escalation. I'm not sure they're enough. I think Tehran has to respond to the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran. But the risk of a tit-for-tat attacks turning into something wider at the moment is very high. I don't think that the extremists on both sides are willing to just let things lie. And I think the situation at the moment is that it's dictated by the extremists in Tehran and in Israel. Netanyahu is bound by his extreme right-wing government ministers, and it boils down to the future of Netanyahu rather than what is best for civilians in both countries.
The US has sent more military might to the region, an extra set of aircraft carriers. The UK obviously has some in the region, nothing comparable to the US. Do you think the UK will end up sending more to the region? And in what way will the West, I guess the US in particular, potentially be drawn in to help or the opposite, I guess, in any potential conflict if it does develop?
As we saw after the Israeli attack on the Iranian consulate in Damascus, Then a coalition of countries stepped in to prevent the attacks from Iran, the missiles and the drones from reaching Israel. I think if it turns into something wider, I think those countries would struggle to keep the situation under control. I think at that occasion there was a little bit of theatre. It was clear that there was some sort of coordination between the sides so that Iran could show that it had responded, but that it didn't turn into something wider. As I said, I don't think either side wants this to turn into a wider war, but I think the risk of that happening is high at the moment. There was a very good statement by the Jordanian foreign minister yesterday. He was speaking to our foreign secretary, David Lammy, and to a number of other foreign ministers. And he said the first step that needs to be taken to prevent this turning into a wider war is for Israel to end its aggression and its violations of international law in Gaza. We have to remember it comes back to not only the situation in Gaza, but the situation in the West Bank, the situation in Jerusalem, and the actions of this extreme Israeli government. 40,000 civilians have been killed okay, some of them are probably Hamas operators, but the large majority are women and children. There is a ceasefire deal on the table, which has been neglected and has not been taken up. The ceasefire deal is the only way to secure the release of the hostages and humanitarian assistance and rebuilding of Gaza. That is the step that would prevent this wider war.
Are you, though, optimistic or pessimistic that that ceasefire deal will get over the line in light of those tensions that we've been talking about relating to Hezbollah and Iran and the possibility of retaliation?
No, of course, the killing of Hamas's political leader in Tehran, if you're trying to do a ceasefire deal, I don't think killing your negotiator or one of the people you're trying to negotiate with is necessarily the best way to secure that deal. I think it is Netanyahu's right-wing ministers who are preventing this ceasefire deal from going through. And that's where all the pressure, yes, the pressure needs to be on Tehran for restraint. The pressure needs to be on Hezbollah for restraint as far as Lebanon is concerned. But the massive pressure from the United States, because that is the country that has the leverage on Netanyahu, that is the way to prevent this wider conflagration in the Middle East.
Just finally, on the US, do you think that Netanyahu in particular is watching the prospects of Trump versus Harris White House incredibly closely? And do you think that will have a big impact on the Middle East in the years ahead?
I think he obviously would prefer to see a Trump presidency. A Trump presidency helped him a lot 4 years ago. I'm sure he's watching it very carefully. You saw the way he was received by the Republicans when he was in Washington a week or so ago. Clearly, the Americans have the leverage here. Joe Biden has the leverage still, even though he's in the last few months. I think it is important for the Americans to play that role, not just with Netanyahu, but with the wider Israeli citizenship and political leadership to prevent this turning into something much worse.
Peter Millett, thank you. Now, in the wake of the riots across the country, tech billionaire Elon Musk's been goading the Prime Minister using his social media platform X. Downing Street criticised tweet replies to Sakir by the Tesla owner, claiming civil war was inevitable. Earlier this week, the Home Secretary told Sky News disinformation on social media was serving as a rocket booster to the anti-immigrant riots. Our data and forensics correspondent, Tom Cheshire, has been looking at exactly how.
Chaos across the country and violent, bloody results seized upon online to shift the narrative.
He needs an ambulance, so he does.
On X, formerly Twitter, the far-right influencer Tommy Robinson falsely said these men had been attacked with knives. Just half an hour later, Staffordshire police put out a statement saying, "We can confirm this information is false and no stabbings have been reported to police, despite videos fueling speculation on social media." Or Sunday in Rotherham, a far-right organisation alleged again on X that migrants inside the besieged hotel had a gun. Nothing of the sort has since been reported or stated by police, and that too was reposted by Robinson. This is real-time misinformation, events being repurposed, reshaped, almost as they happen by online influencers, in turn exacerbating the situation back on the ground. And much of that is down to Robinson's expanded reach on X. If you look at this is his follow account on Twitter, as it was called. He was obviously not allowed to post or tweet then, and since he's been allowed back on, his followers have surged more than 200,000 over the last 30 days. And that means when it comes to a tweet like this, obviously incorrect. This is reaching many more people. This hasn't been taken down. There's been no note attached to it to warn people that this is misinformation. And some of that may be because of who's dealing with Robinson, the man who put him back on the platform, the man who owns the platform, Elon Musk, replying to this tweet, quoting Tommy Robinson. And Elon Musk has sort of doubled down on this. He wrote, "Civil war is inevitable," referring to the UK. That may explain why some of the tone online has changed. Look at this. This shows tweets related to Southport and anti-Muslim and anti-immigrant sentiment. We saw this obviously spike during the attack, and it seems to have come down. But actually, what's happened is something different. We've got this line, and this just shows general protest plus anti-Muslim, anti-immigrant sentiment. That has overtaken this line now. Southport itself being forgotten. We see that reflected finally in the types of site being targeted by protesters and rioters. You can see the type of site here. Instant red, that is responding to something. Then that mosque protest on the second day. Then immigration starts to come in green, and it becomes more of a concern. Black is general. And what we see planned ahead, if we look at the Telegram accounts we've been monitoring, this is what's planned for the next week. It's obviously a lot bigger. Not all of these may happen. This is a plan. It is not reality yet. But there is a clear focus on immigration-related sites. That is a change. In a post on X, the Prime Minister said on Monday that he would apply criminal law online as well as offline, and that attacks on Muslim communities would not be tolerated. That prompted Musk to respond directly, saying, "Shouldn't you be concerned about attacks on all communities?" He is not backing down. This is a uniquely challenging situation, when the offline and the online worlds are colliding and shaping each other in unpredictable ways. Tom Cheshire, Sky News.
Still to come here on The Breakfast Show this morning, Democratic delegates have selected Kamala Harris to be their 2024 presidential nominee, but who will she be picking as her running mate? That's expected in the next couple of days. We'll discuss the runners and riders. Plus, 7:45, Ofwat's chief executive will join us live to discuss those fines imposed today on 3 water companies.
I'm Mark Stone and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
Wall Street! Wall Street!
Well, the plan seems to be to head to the police station where the policeman who fired the shots was based.
And everything, his memories is all gone.
In almost every corner, this town has been completely destroyed by the fire. I've witnessed the remarkable passion for politics here, but the anger too.
We have to get Trump out of the White House.
Is this the moment to reform gun laws?
It's easy to go to politics.
But it's important. It's at the heart of the issue.
I get that that's where the media likes to go.
No, it's not. It's where many of the people we've talked to here like to go.
I report on the biggest stories from around the world. This is a town that is effectively encircled by the Russians.
You say it's all fabrication, what's happening in Bucha?
Destroyed my nation.
We take you to the heart of stories that shape our planet. I can hear now quite a few explosions in the distance here in Jerusalem. A very violent series of confrontations.
Ghislaine Maxwell has pleaded.
Everybody here knows the truth of ISIS.
Welcome back to The Breakfast Show. Well, coming up in just a moment, who will Kamala Harris choose to take on the Trump-Vance ticket? We'll discuss that with two US political strategists, one from each side, in just a moment. But first, all of the day's top stories.
Thank you, Wilfred. Yes, several police officers have been injured and a police van was damaged as rival protest groups faced off. In Plymouth, the crowds were held apart by lines of riot police, with violence breaking out as protesters threw rocks and fireworks. Meanwhile, rioters in Belfast have also been out for a second night, throwing petrol bombs and missiles at the police. A former head of the UK's counter-terror police force has said it's time to start treating the worst of the riots as terrorism. Neil Basu condemned those involved as bullies and cowards. A water regulator have proposed a combined record fine of £168 million to 3 water companies in the UK after a series of failures. Ofwat plan to impose £104 million penalty on Thames Water, £47 million on Yorkshire Water and £17 million on Northumberland Water after investigation into the management of their sewage treatment works and the wider network. Student protesters in Bangladesh have called for the Nobel Peace Prize winner, Muhammad Yunus, to lead the country. It's after the Prime Minister fled to Pakistan following deadly protests. The country's army chief will meet with student protest leaders as he seeks guidance on forming an interim government.
Yeah, great stuff. Thank you. Now, Kamala Harris has officially claimed her Democratic presidential nomination and is soon closing in on selecting a running mate. But will this decision make or break her chances of winning the election? Let's discuss that and all of the very latest ahead of that November vote with Republican strategist Amy Tarkanian and Democrat strategist Theryn Bond. Thank you both for joining us. Great to see you. I'll come to you first, Theryn. I mean, we are expecting the vice presidential running mate pick for Kamala Harris in any moment now, potentially even today. Are you expecting it that soon? And who do you think she will pick?
I think it's going to be like, surprise, surprise, here it is. She's held it close to the chest as long as she can. It's time. We're close enough to the Democratic convention. Former President Donald Trump has already revealed his vice presidential pick. We need to know who's going to balance out Vice President Kamala Harris on her ticket as she runs for president. There are choices that are better than others, and it can indeed make or break her election.
Who is the best choice in your eyes? And do you think she will be aiming to seriously balance out whatever it is she needs to balance out, or pick someone kind of a similar mould?
I definitely think she wants somebody who's going to shine bright, but not necessarily outshine her. She does need to balance it out with ideologies somewhat, because there are certain voting blocks that she needs to maintain, but there are also voting blocks that she needs to win over that have been long overlooked or have become truly apathetic. I think if we look at the top two at this point between Governor Shapiro and Governor Walz, Governor Walz is the better choice. He's not only the safe choice, he's the best choice, he's the most progressive choice, and he's the choice that can win over middle America, young voters, Black and brown voters, because he speaks closest to their issues even more so than she does, and certainly more than Shapiro does.
In terms, Amy, of the pick that former President Trump made of J.D. Vance, with the fact that the person he's facing has changed, obviously, from Biden to Kamala Harris, is there some level of regret that he picked someone who many people see is doubling down on a lot of his ideological issues, but obviously also picking someone very young? Is J.D. Vance now a less ideal running mate to face off to Kamala Harris than it was against President Biden?
Sure. Well, I'm a more moderate Republican, and I was actually part of what was now deemed the double haters, which meant that you were somebody who was not happy with the rematch of both Donald Trump and then the future possible nominee of Joe Biden. And so now that the top people have changed, being Harris and Biden, you still have a lot of voters that are on the fence. And J.D. Vance was a nail in President Trump's coffin. And it's unfortunate because, now you've got somebody who whose comments have come back to haunt not just him, but the entire presidency for the Republican ticket. And these are comments that were made recent, not years ago, not somebody who's evolved over time, but somebody who has made some pretty damning comments to women in particular. And so if you're somebody who maybe hasn't been paying that close of attention, somebody who really isn't that hyper-focused on a number of the issues outside, let's say, the top three being, like the economy, inflation, making sure you get control of illegal immigration, making sure you can put food on the table for your children. Well, now he's opened up a whole nother can of worms because he's offending an entire voting bloc that he struggled with from the get-go. And so if you're going to call women, names, if you're going to now even call Kamala Harris derogatory names, whether if you know how she's voted or not in the past, it actually doesn't matter now to a number of voters.
So that's like the running mates argument covered off. Clearly, this election will ultimately be decided by the top of the ticket. And Amy, it was interesting. For a couple of weeks there, President Trump seriously did, which is rare for him, I think it's fair to say, as someone that covered his presidency pretty closely. He stayed on message and moderated his message as well during a period of time that involved, obviously, the debate, the successful debate for him against President Biden and then the assassination attempt. Has he lost that ability in the last couple of weeks? And could that be damning for him if it maintains in this way?
Yes, you are 100% correct. And it seemed that he was on top. It seemed that he was actually excelling and he was at a pivotal moment in his campaign. It seemed that he had matured as a candidate at that moment. Whoever was talking in his ear was giving him some very wise, strategy to heed. And it seemed that he was actually listening and following. And it's a smart strategy to just continue to allow your opponent to unravel instead of having to interject. And that's what he was very smartly doing at that moment. And then he had a nearly perfect, if not perfectly ran, convention. And so, and then you had the unfortunate assassination attempt, which he came out on top and excelled and thankfully wasn't hurt. But the whole thing seemed to have, the wind was going at his back. And then now he's just flailing and falling apart once again and not able to control his temper, not able to control all of his posts that he's posting on Truth Social, calling Kamala derogatory names, and it's damaging him.
Theryn, on the other side, is it fair to say that Kamala Harris hasn't faced full scrutiny yet since she became at least the presumptive nominee, a few weeks ago, the full nominee obviously only in the last couple of days. But over those few weeks, has she thus far avoided proper head-to-head interviews? And do you think when she does face those, that's a risk for her?
I think that the naysayers have been very light with their comments up to this point. But once she solidifies her vice presidential pick, it's game on, gloves off, and everything is out there in the open to be used for her or against her for that matter. I do think there will be more things that come out that are highlighted from her past that could work heavily against her. But if she makes the right choice for vice president on her ticket, that's where that balance comes in. However, nobody really wanted the rematch of any part of these tickets. And so what the bigger assessment of this election is not that Republicans wanted a particular person and here's what they left with, or Democrats wanted a particular person and here's what we're left with. This election is going to be decided by independent voters, but both sides are discounting the fact that a lot of voters are apathetic. They don't like the processes. They aren't happy with the choices. And so they will sit at home on the couch, no pun intended, if they don't see their policy concerns addressed.
Just to wrap things up there, and I wanted to come back to what we might expect in the next couple of days on the VP pick. If it's not Josh Shapiro, why do you think Kamala Harris is going to his state to hold a big event in conjunction with him? Could it backfire a little bit? Has she created this, whether explicitly or implicitly, this race between now, it seems, two people to the detriment of whoever doesn't get it? Could it cause dissatisfaction within her own party and people that vote within it based on who she doesn't choose?
I think all signs are there to indicate that she is going to pick Governor Shapiro, but it hasn't happened yet. And so everyone's on pins and needles as we wait. I think the same way that we were unsure about who former President Donald Trump was going to pick right down to the last minute, we're sitting in the same manner on the Democratic side. I don't think she needs Governor Shapiro to win Pennsylvania. I think she's built a good enough relationship with him to win over voters in Pennsylvania. I think he will help her do it, whether or not he is on the ticket. And I think that there are better options than him. It's going to take everybody, all hands on deck. So if she can win Pennsylvania without him, it would behoove her to win over voters with a better option.
Amy and Theryn, thank you both, as always, for joining us, particularly given that you've been joining us from Florida and Nashville, respectively, at 1, 2 a.m. or whatever time it is there. We appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So to come here on The Breakfast Show, the Ofwat CEO will join us on the day that he announces massive fines for the three of the biggest water companies in the UK. We'll be right back.
This conflict.
They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Heavy vehicle.
Why only in America?
People want their country to work.
You want a job in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty? I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first. Free wherever you get your news.
Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before?
Yes.
Cheers. We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.
Welcome back. 3 water companies are facing a combined record fine of £168 million after a series of failings, including over sewage treatment. The chief executive of Ofwat, the regulator, David Black, joins us live now. Very good morning to you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Good morning.
These companies' fines, record combined for Thames Water, the biggest one is 104 million. Why? Why are you imposing these fines?
So what we've uncovered is a catalogue of failings by water companies in the treatment and safe discharge of sewage. So each company has an obligation to maintain a minimum level of capacity, and that ensures they only discharge sewage into waterways in exceptional circumstances. What we've uncovered today is widespread discharges outside of the exceptional circumstances which they're permitted to discharge.
£104 million if we focus on Thames Water. Gauge for us how big that fine is relative to what your rules are, what you could have fined them.
So we can fine them up to 10% of the relevant turnover. The Thames fine is 9%, and that recognises the seriousness of the breaches that we have uncovered.
And how do you think it will go down for Thames Water? Obviously not well, but this is a company that's been on the verge of going bankrupt for quite some time.
Yes, so Thames face serious challenges. They need to turn around their operational performance, and they need to raise new equity and turn around the finances of the business. However, we're very clear that we will not relent from enforcing their obligations, whatever the financial circumstances of the company. So this is for the investors to address, and this is why we're imposing the fines today.
Clearly, by going for 9% of their revenue when your max is 10%, you've pretty much gone as big as you could have done, which I think is telling. That said, did you weigh up whether or not this might push them over the edge, push them into bankruptcy as a factor, or is that not really something for you to consider?
That's not a relevant consideration for us. What we've looked at is the scale of the breaches, and we've sought to impose a proportionate remedy. This is a draft decision. We're open to Thames proposing a settlement which would involve them fixing these issues and investing the money in their business to drive better performance.
And in terms of, again, one of the factors that people wonder about fines, is this something that you do think in the short term might lead to higher bills for consumers?
No, not at all.
Not at all?
So we set the rules on what charges they can recover from customers, and so we make absolutely no provision for fines in the levels of bills that are set for customers. So customers can reassured these fines sit with the investors, not with customers and water companies.
Is it still overall, both on the outcomes, quality of water, but also the prices? Are we in a moment in time where the short term doesn't look great for consumers, but hopefully with things like these actions you're taking, the long term improves?
Indeed. So we're very clear the sector needs to change. We need to see a turnaround in performance from water companies, including Thames Water. And so what we set out today is enforcement of the law. We've also announced recently an £88 billion investment plan for the sector to drive performance above and beyond the current legal requirements. And so we think that the sector can, and we do see signs of change. So we do see signs of companies recognising these issues. There's a lot of work to be done, but we're very confident the sector can turn around its performance and can regain the trust of its customers.
How much responsibility do you take as the regulator for the disappointing position that the sector's in at the moment?
So we enforce the law. So it's our role to enforce the law, and that's the action that we've taken today. At the moment we uncovered these issues, we opened our investigations. I wrote to water companies on becoming chief executive to raise my concerns about the level of discharges and remind them of the obligations under the law. We haven't yet seen the action to address those issues. The safe treatment and discharge of sewage sits with water companies. They need to address those obligations.
That said, regulators obviously have this role to oversee and hold people to account when things are clear to see. It's not a case that this is a small company doing something fraudulent that they've covered up for years that the regulator very cleverly has uncovered. This is many water companies doing something fairly obvious. I mean, could and should the regulator have done something sooner?
I mean, ideally, change would have happened sooner. But what we have done is imposed the monitoring obligations on companies, and these are a world first. There's no other country that I'm aware of requires that every storm overflow is monitored. That has uncovered the scale of the discharges. So what we're identifying here is action that hasn't been taken elsewhere. This is an issue that is present in many countries around the globe, and so what we're taking is action to require companies to comply with the obligations. We've also set out an £88 billion investment plan to drive better outcomes for the future.
In terms that, I think this investigation started in 2 years ago?
Yes, that's right.
And last year itself was one of the worst years of outcomes for sewage disposition. So again, I just come back to the point of could this all have been carried out a lot quicker, a lot more efficiently? I believe you've been at Ofwat since 2012, you've been CEO since 2021. Are you disappointed we are where we are?
So clearly we would like to see better outcomes for the sector. No one wants to see sewage discharged into rivers. As I said, when I became chief executive, I wrote to companies. One of my first acts was to write to companies pointing out the seriousness of these issues, calling for action. I think this was a case where these overflows weren't measured, therefore companies didn't pay sufficient attention to them. And what we've uncovered in terms of the companies is insufficient attention in the boardroom. I think there are lessons for us as a regulator. I think we need to be much more involved, much more engaged, and much more interventionist in the way that we regulate. That's why we've looked at how we've conducted regulation. That's why we're changing. We've set out, we've won new powers from the government. I've trebled the number of people we've got working on our enforcement cases, which recognises the severity of these issues. So we recognise the need to change as a regulator. That said, the obligation to safely treat and discharge sewage sits with water companies, and that's what I'm determined to uphold.
And then just finally, David, I mean, you mentioned you've won some new powers from the government. There's a new government now in place. Are there some simple things, easy things that you would seek from them to boost your powers, to boost your oversights and responsibilities, such that if you came on to the show again in 2 or 3 years' time, you'd be very confident that we're in a fantastic position in terms of sewage dumping?
So there's a huge job to be done, and that requires investment. It requires much better performance from companies, and those are the steps that we're taking. There are real concerns about things like company bonuses, chief executive bonuses, and so we're talking with the government about new powers in that space. I think the law needs to be clarified. So the existing law allows discharges in exceptional circumstances. I think we need to be very clear about the standards that we're expecting from companies, and that's why we're driving companies to get down to a fixed target and to eliminate harm from storm overflow. So I wouldn't underestimate the scale of the task to be done. There's a huge investment task. Some of these issues are very challenging. That said, I'm confident we can see real performance gains. There's already one company that's recognised these issues and is taking action now. I really want to encourage all other companies to follow suit and to take action and not delay further action on these issues.
David Black, Chief Executive of Ofwat. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's have a look at today's weather for you. And the next couple of days will bring blustery showers concentrated in the north and the west before more general rain moves in for Thursday. Mostly fine, warm and humid now, but showers are moving into the west, while patchy light rain is edging into East Anglia and the southeast. That'll become confined to eastern coastal counties by lunchtime, leaving central Britain mostly fine, but a scattering of blustery showers will take over the west. That's your weather. Now, thousands of children are still waiting weeks for a gender care appointment, despite the opening of 2 new specialist service centres. For more, let's bring in our correspondent, Daniel Henry. Daniel, talk to us about what's available to people in this area, when that became available, and these delays that we're referring to.
Well, it's all changing, really, in this space. The only centre for gender identity service used to be run by the Tavistock and Portman NHS Trust, but that was closed in July 2022, following complaints and a review about the level of service, describing it as inadequate. So that service closed in July 2022. There was supposed to be new services that were going to be rolling out as pretty much as of then. They've only started to come in as of March of this year. 2 of them will be at Great Ormond Street, the other one at Alderhay Hospital in Liverpool. And at the point that the Tavistock closed, they were, this is from 2021 to 2022, they had around 5,000 patients. So it was just an indication, really, of how demand for that kind of service was increasing. And the closure of that then left another gap, which is why we're now seeing 5,700 children waiting nearly 2 years for their first appointment for this kind of service.
Daniel, great stuff. Thanks so much for that, Daniel Henry, on that story. But stick around, because family's all here. Avengers have assembled, my favourite part of the hour always, to talk about a couple of stories. First, let's do the serious. Murray, we're looking ahead to the interview with Heidi Alexander towards the top of the next hour. And these comments from Neil Basu have got a lot of attention that we can put to her. She's, of course, the Minister for Courts.
Yeah, exactly. So Neil Bastu's been saying that actually some of these rioters, some of the violence that we've seen needs to be treated as terrorism, and the government needs to go further on it, and the punishment therefore should be more severe. So it'll be interesting to see how much the government buckles under that pressure. You know, he's a former counter-terrorism police chief, so he's got a lot of weight in terms of his words.
Heidi Alexander coming up about 10 past the hour. We've also got this to share with you. Another Banksy image has been revealed. I guess we think it's Banksy. Do we know it's Banksy? We do know it's Banksy, I'm told.
Information.
There we go. I mean, I just love when these pop up. And I think they're always fantastic. He's obviously extraordinarily talented. I, again, always come back to the point, is like, how long does it take him to do it? How does he do it so secretly with nobody ever seeming to notice? Or is this now just like an agreement that if you spot Banksy doing a painting, don't tell anyone until the next day?
Just move on. Well, it's his stencils, isn't it? So he does it really quickly. But do you remember the girl with the balloon? That really famous
Fantastic
Banksy.
one, yeah.
It was sold at auction for £1 million, and as it went, it was shredded. There was a shredder, which the auction house sort of said, "Have we been Banksy'd?" So I love that moment.
Spare time, Will?
Definitely not. I mean, I wish. I have very little artistic talent, musical talent, any of these things. No, definitely not.
That one reminds me of those goats that climb up that really steep cliff to lick the salt off the wall. That's as soon as I saw that, that's what I thought. I don't think that's what he's got in mind.
More to say about that goat in the next hour, but we're out of time for this hour. We'll be right back after this short break with all the day's top stories. A very good morning to you. It is 8 o'clock on today's programme. Another night of sustained violence with petrol bombs thrown at police in Belfast and police hit with bricks and fireworks in Plymouth.
A former head of counter-terror policing in the UK says the worst of the rioting should be treated as terrorism, with warnings that immigration lawyers could be targeted.
And joining us in the next few minutes, the Courts Minister, Heidi Alexander, will ask her about how they plan to speed up processing through the courts and Sir Keir Starmer's plans for what he calls a standing army of officers.
It's Tuesday, the 6th of August. Your headlines. In Plymouth, several police officers are injured and a police van is damaged on another night of anti-immigrant far-right violence.
How difficult is this to police tonight? Off the scale. It's off the scale today. With the resources we've got.
In Belfast, the second night of violence, these rioters throw petrol bombs and missiles at police. 3 water companies face a collective fine of £168 million after an investigation by the regulator.
Each company has an obligation to maintain a minimum level of capacity, and that ensures they only discharge sewage into waterways in exceptional circumstances.
Student protesters in Bangladesh call for Nobel Peace Prize winner Muhammad Yunus to lead the country after the Prime Minister flees. The full extent of failings and conditions at Wandsworth prison is revealed, highlighting a deeper problem with Britain's prison system. Traders take courage. Asian markets rebound after a day of sell-offs saw huge falls around the globe yesterday. A very good morning to you. Several police officers have been injured in Plymouth after being attacked by rioters last night. It marks yet another night of sustained violence after false information spread online about the Southport stabbings, sparking far-right anti-immigrant disorder. Today, a former head of the UK's counter-terror police force has said it's time to start treating the worst of the riots as terrorism. More on that shortly. But first, Dan Whitehead has all the latest for us from Plymouth.
They were prepared for protest, but not on this scale. For more than 4 hours, violent clashes erupted across this city, a week on from the horrors in Southport. Community anger now being felt hundreds of miles away.
There are 30 or so riot officers on either side of this main road in the centre of Plymouth. They are doing their best to keep these two groups separate as the tension rises.
At least 1,000 protesters from Stand Up to Racism and a counter-group against immigration were behind the clash.
I think it's scary what's happening in the country. The division is awful, and I think a lot of it's perpetrated by the media, twisting things.
People can come in here and just get what pensions they like. They bring their families in. We've got a system that will take care of proper legal migrants. It's the illegal migrants that we don't want here.
As night fell, the protests got more violent. At least 3 police officers were injured. Those in charge admitting this was a difficult evening.
This is not protest anymore. In my opinion, this is violence. This is sustained violence. Unfortunately, large masonry was thrown at us. Whether it was aimed at us or others or opposing groups, we don't know yet. The investigation will identify that. But yeah, three officers down. How difficult is this to police tonight? Off the scale. It's off the scale today. With the resources we've got, it's difficult.
There were 150 officers deployed in the city, but at times it didn't feel enough. The PM's promise of a standby army didn't feel deployed here tonight. Dan Whitehead, Sky News in Plymouth.
Well, Belfast also experienced a second night of unrest and rioters threw petrol bombs and missiles at police there. The Police Service of Northern Ireland warned the public to stay away from some areas of the city while they dealt with the public disorder and violence on the streets. Sky News teams saw around a dozen people wearing balaclavas and masks throwing petrol bombs at armoured police vehicles. Mari's here to discuss all of the political implications of this. Mari, at what point does this start to really do damage to the Prime Minister and the government in terms of feeling like it's on him to have done more at this point?
I think that's a really good question. And I think the difficulty is with this unrest that everybody seems to have a slightly different perspective on how tough the government needs to be, what kind of cracking down we need to be seeing from Keir Starmer. But I think one thing that everybody can agree on is that nobody wants to feel unsafe on the streets, and therefore people want to feel that the police have a grip of the violence and of some of this rioting. So there is pressure now from Neil Basu, former counter-terrorism chief, who has said that actually some of these offences, some of this violence that we've been seeing needs to be treated as terrorism, needs to be cracked down as terrorism, and therefore people should be charged with terrorism offences, essentially. And we haven't seen that happen yet, but there has been some talk of whether that might need to happen at some point, that threshold might be met. Also, the concern is a list of solicitors' firms, advice centres and those addresses have been shared online, addresses of immigration law specialists, for instance, inviting people to attack those locations and saying that people should mask up. Now, that has been a concern for the government in terms of the fact that if these plots were to go ahead later this week, we could see people and centres being attacked and specifically targeted, which would be a really massive concern. Now, when it comes to the capacity of the police to actually be able to deal with these protests, there has been a bit of a mixed bag. Dan Whitehead, one of our great correspondents on Sky News, last night was speaking to a police chief who was saying actually it was really quite extreme and really difficult to police.
And Murray, there was also a big spat as well between Keir Starmer and Elon Musk.
Yeah, massive spat between those two. So it's a really weird thing, considering that Elon Musk is not in the UK. He doesn't really normally talk about British politics. So he has said that civil war is inevitable. Now, in relation to some of those scenes we've been seeing, now the PM's spokesperson then said there was no justification for comments like that. Elon Musk then responded to a tweet from the Prime Minister, who was talking about how those who had been harassing Muslims in certain communities in the UK would be met with the full force of the law. And Elon Musk then replied saying, well, what about all of our communities? So there's a bit of a spat going on between Keir Starmer and Elon Musk, which is slightly bizarre. And some politicians have weighed in and said, actually, Elon Musk, keep your nose out.
Murray, great stuff, as always. Thank you very much for that. As you can see, Murray has left the set, and taking her place is the Courts Minister, Heidi Alexander, to discuss all of the latest developments. A very good morning to you, Minister. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Wanted to start with the comments Murray was saying in her first bit of analysis there about what Neil Basu had been saying, the former counter-terrorism chief, that some of the worst actions of this violence in the last week should be considered under terrorism laws. Is that something that the government agrees with?
So all decisions about charging will be matters for the Crown Prosecution Service, and there will clearly be a range of offences that have been committed, some very serious offences, violent disorder, rioting, I suspect, incitement to racial hatred, but those decisions are for the CPS, and as a politician, I'm not going to get involved in those and pass commentary on it. What I do want to ensure, though, is that the individuals who are responsible for this absolutely disgusting and vile and totally unacceptable behaviour on our streets, and let's be honest, it is racist attacks, it is dangerous extremism and downright criminal behaviour, that they need to face consequences for their actions. Because when somebody, chooses to throw a brick at a police officer, chooses to set a building alight, they're choosing to commit a criminal offence at that point.
So you're saying it's dangerous extremism, it's violence, it's disgusting, I think you said. Is it potentially terrorism?
Well, it will be for the Crown Prosecution Service to look at all the evidence. As you will understand, there'll be a huge amount of digital evidence that the police and the CPS need to be wading through in order to build the case for the prosecution. And it will be for them to decide what the most appropriate charge is for any individual.
And is the court system ready to cope, ready to handle the potential number of cases that comes its way?
Yeah, so this weekend we stood up 70 extra prosecutors. We ran 60 remand courts in 50 locations. Back in 2011, there was also longer sitting hours in the magistrates' court, where some magistrates' courts sat into the evenings and over weekends. After the riots, something called the Additional Courts Protocol was set up so that we could be ready if we needed to do something similar again in future. It's actually a matter for the judiciary to take the decision to invoke the Additional Courts Protocol. And what would happen is that in particular regions of the country where there was particular pressure, the chief police officer, along with the chief prosecutor in that region, would make an application to the judiciary. And yesterday we saw that the judiciary say that they would be willing to consider that, because I think we're all on the same page here. We know that not only does there need to be a robust police response on the streets, and we've already seen that with thousands of specialist trained public order officers, but we also need to be delivering swift and effective justice.
So is what you're saying, because there's been this debate, will there be 24-hour courts, will there not be? I get that you're saying it's sort of a local decision within the judiciary and the police. What you're saying right now is that whatever is needed in order to deliver the capacity that is needed in the coming days is there already?
Correct. At the moment, all of the cases are being dealt with within normal sitting hours. If pressure builds and we need to change that, we will do everything that we need to do, and I know the judiciary stand ready to do the same, to make sure that cases can be processed quickly, and we are also making sure that prison places are available. So if there's anyone out there thinking about getting involved in this, they can rest assured that there will be a prison place waiting for them if they are convicted and get a custodial sentence.
So how many prison places have you vacated or ensured are available?
So one of the things that we have done in the last week is bring forward some additional prison places, and so we have made an additional 567 prison places available, a new house block at Stocken Prison in Rutland. We've also repurposed some space at a youth offender institute in Cookham in Kent, which can now be used for the male prison estate. And so we have got additional prison places that are available in the short term, because the individuals that are, carrying out this violent disorder, do need to face consequences for their actions.
What about the capacity for the police at the moment? Yesterday, our Dan Whitehead spoke to Inspector Ryan Northmore in Plymouth and asked, how difficult is it to police this on the site of an ongoing protest, ongoing riot? And he said it's off the scale. With the resources that we've got, it's off the scale and it's difficult. Do the police need more resources immediately in a way that, as you're saying, there's perhaps the ability to add more when it's needed in the court system? Is that not the case with the police?
I think it is very difficult for the police at the moment. It's very challenging, and I'd like to put on record my thanks and the thanks of the government to all the policemen and women who are policing these riots. And let's be clear, they are riots and not protests. It's sheer criminality. I know that the Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, speaks very regularly to the police chiefs, and she has been assured by the police chiefs that they have the powers and the resources that they need. You might have heard the Prime Minister yesterday talking about the standing army of specialist trained public order police officers that we made available this weekend. There's another 2,000 that are available this week, and they can be deployed to areas of greatest need. And you will also know that last week the Prime Minister very quickly established the Violent Disorder Programme so that police forces can effectively share intelligence, looking at enhanced use of facial recognition technology that is used in some places, so that we can ensure that the policing response is as effective as possible.
Yesterday, the Home Secretary told me that social media put rocket fuel under what's going on. As we understand from the latest numbers, around about 400 arrests have been made so far. Are you able to tell us if any of those have been based purely on people's online activity that haven't attended in any physical way the riots that we've seen? And is that something that you expect to be a part of the response from government and the justice system in the days ahead?
I don't have that level of granular detail about the 400 arrests, but what I do know is that people who are participating in or inciting this violence, whether it's on the streets or online, they will face criminal sanction. The idea that you can sit behind a computer screen or sit behind the screen of your mobile phone and somehow think that that protects you from the law is for the birds. So we will take a very robust approach to the social media companies. I know that Peter Kyle, the Secretary of State for Science and Technology, is already in conversation with them. There's been some welcome action where there's been automated removal of some false information. But I do think the social media companies could and should be doing more. They've got a moral responsibility not to be propagating and disseminating misleading and inflammatory content on their platforms.
And just finally, I wanted to touch on something that I guess it comes out a little bit in the spat that we've seen between the Prime Minister and Elon Musk, the head of X and other companies. One of the tweets that Elon Musk put out was that civil war was inevitable. Everyone is shocked by the scenes that we've seen, and you've clearly captured your very firm views towards it. But is there an exaggeration of the scale, not the severity, but the scale of it, in the sense that we've had 400 or so arrests? In 2011, we had around 3,000 arrests. Any number of criminal convictions for this behaviour is clearly something that we wish to avoid. But are some people, perhaps people even overseas, almost sort of trying to enjoy this and amplify what's going on?
I think everyone who has a platform on social media needs to behave responsibly with that platform. And given that we've seen police officers seriously injured, buildings being set alight, I think everyone should be calling for calm in this situation. And so I do think the language around civil war being inevitable is totally unjustified. And I think the Prime Minister's spokesperson was right to say that yesterday. And so, look, I think the online world is almost the next frontier in the fight against crime. Clearly, there's some legislation that has been brought forward by the previous government, the Online Safety, Online Harms Act. Some of the provisions of that haven't yet come into force, but the social media companies shouldn't be waiting for all of those provisions to come into force. They should be actually doing the right thing and asking themselves what more they can be doing to stop the propagation and dissemination of this material and content online.
Heidi Alexander, thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you.
Much appreciated.
Thanks for your time.
Well, in the wake of those riots that we've been talking about, as mentioned, tech billionaire Elon Musk was goading the Prime Minister. Let's just go through a little bit more detail on that. The Downing Street spokesperson criticised the tweet that had been put out by the Tesla owner, having claimed civil war was inevitable. Let's now dive into Tom Cheshire's analysis of all of the online activity over the last week relating to this story.
Chaos across the country and violent, bloody results seized upon online to shift the narrative.
He needs an ambulance, so he does.
On X, formerly Twitter, the far-right influencer Tommy Robinson falsely said these men had been attacked with knives. Just half an hour later, Staffordshire Police put out a statement saying, "We can confirm this information is false and no stabbings have been reported to police, despite videos fueling speculation on social media." Or Sunday in Rotherham, a far-right organisation alleged again on X that migrants inside the besieged hotel had a gun. Nothing of the sort has since been reported or stated by police, and that too was reposted by Robinson. This is real-time misinformation, events being repurposed, reshaped, almost as they happen by online influencers, in turn exacerbating the situation back on the ground.
And much of that is down to Robinson's expanded reach on X. If you look at this is his follow account on Twitter, as it was called. He was obviously not allowed to post or tweet then, and since he's been allowed back on, his followers have surged more than 200,000 over the last 30 days. And that means when it comes to a tweet like this, obviously incorrect. This is reaching many more people. This hasn't been taken down. There's been no note attached to it to warn people that this is misinformation. And some of that may be because of who's dealing with Robinson, the man who put him back on the platform, the man who owns the platform, Elon Musk, replying to this tweet, quoting Tommy Robinson. And Elon Musk has sort of doubled down on this. He wrote, "Civil war is inevitable," referring to the UK. That may explain why some of the tone online has changed. Look at this. This shows tweets related to Southport and anti-Muslim and anti-immigrant sentiment. We saw this obviously spike during the attack, and it seems to have come down. But actually, what's happened is something different. We've got this line, and this just shows general protest plus anti-Muslim, anti-immigrant sentiment. That has overtaken this line now. Southport itself being forgotten. We see that reflected finally in the types of site being targeted by protesters and rioters. You can see the type of site here. Instant red, that is responding to something. Then that mosque protest on the second day. Then immigration starts to come in green, and it becomes more of a concern. Black is general. And what we see planned ahead, if we look at the Telegram accounts we've been monitoring, this is what's planned for the next week. It's obviously a lot bigger. Not all of these may happen. This is a plan. It is not reality yet. But there is a clear focus on immigration-related sites. That is a change. In a post on X, the Prime Minister said on Monday that he would apply criminal law online as well as offline, and that attacks on Muslim communities would not be tolerated. That prompted Musk to respond directly, saying, "Shouldn't you be concerned about attacks on all communities?" He is not backing down. This is a uniquely challenging situation, when the offline and the online worlds are colliding and shaping each other in unpredictable ways. Tom Cheshire, Sky News.
Oh, well, time now for all of the day's other top stories, and Leah's got those for us.
Thank you so much, Wilfred. We'll turn to the US, because after fears that America may be heading towards recession, markets in Asia have rebounded. So let's look at the details. Well, Taiwan's stock exchange jumped following a record drop yesterday, but shed some of the gains later in the morning amid lingering concerns over the US economy and tech companies too. And the most dramatic recovery was Japan's Nikkei. It soared nearly 11% after it plunged by more than 12%, and it's the biggest fall since Black Monday in October 1987. Student protesters in Bangladesh have called for Nobel Peace Prize winner Muhammad Yunus to lead the country after the Prime Minister fled to Pakistan following deadly protests. Let's speak now to our India correspondent Neville Lazarus with the very latest. So Sheikh Hasina has resigned. Give us a sense, Neville, of the mood and what might happen next.
Well, it's very uncertain at the moment in Bangladesh. Earlier, we've seen celebrations after the resignation and fleeing of the Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, against whom there was these large demonstrations spiraling to violence, killing more than 300 people over the last few weeks. But the mood is slightly changing. I was speaking to a journalist friend in Dhaka who said now because of the uncertainty, people are now slowly coming onto the roads, wondering what is happening out there. The student protesters have put their foot down and said it's going to be Muhammad Yunus, the 2006 Nobel Peace Prize winner who had revolutionized microfinancing in the country, uplifting millions of people, especially women. He has accepted their offer. The Students' Union saying that they will not accept any other proposal from the government apart from theirs, and they will definitely not accept an army-led or army-supported interim government. So there is a lot of uncertainty. The army chief is speaking with the protest, the union, the leaders of the protest movements, the students, and we are waiting to hear what is the outcome of that. On the other side, we've seen Sheikh Hasina, who fled the country yesterday, resigning. Came to India, landed at an airbase about 20 miles from here. And at the moment, we have reports that she is still in India. There were reports that she is seeking asylum in Britain, but we cannot confirm when she will leave for the UK. In Bangladesh, there is uncertainty, and there has been now sporadic violence, which we've heard over the last few hours. Members of parliament from the ruling government, which was deposed, their homes being attacked and burnt down.
Neville, thank you. A US judge has, Google acted illegally to maintain a monopoly on online searches. The internet giant spent billions of dollars to be the default search method on browsers and devices in violation of antitrust law. Now, the parent company, Alphabet, says it will appeal. Vice President Kamala Harris is expected to name her running mate today before an appearance with her VP pick in Philadelphia. She formally secured the Democratic presidential nomination on Monday after a virtual roll call vote. No challengers put themselves forward before the deadline, and that was on the 27th of July.
Yeah, thank you. Now, breaking news this morning, the water regulators proposed a large fine towards 3 water companies after an investigation into sewage failures. A little earlier, the chief executive of Ofwat said the penalty relates to mismanagement of storm overflows.
What we've uncovered is a catalogue of failings by water companies in the treatment and safe discharge of sewage. So each company has an obligation to maintain a minimum level of capacity, and that ensures they only discharge sewage into waterways in exceptional circumstances. What we've uncovered today is widespread discharges outside of the exceptional circumstances which they're permitted to discharge.
Well, Sky's business correspondent Paul Kelso is here with the details. And Paul, talk us through the significance of the size of the fines. But we also heard from the regulator there that he felt it's not his business to decide whether or not these fines might push one of these companies over the edge or not.
Yeah, it is an interesting balancing act. Let's start with what they've done this morning, announced this morning. 3 companies, a very hefty fine, £168 million in total, the biggest Thames Water, £104 million. That's 9% of its revenue, which is just shy of the maximum the regulator can do, which is 10%. Yorkshire Water, £47 million. I misidentified them last time I spoke to you, so to be clear, that's Yorkshire Water, £47 million, and Northumbrian Water, £17 million, the smaller one. This is for mismanaging and failing to prevent sewage pouring into rivers and waterways largely through storm overflows. A great deal of public disgust that we can see one there. These are supposed to be only in exceptional circumstances when there's very heavy rain. The alternative will be rainwater and wastewater shares the same pipes in our Victorian system. The alternative will be backing up into people's homes. In exceptional circumstances, it can be released into rivers. Well, we now know it's become clear this is happening hundreds of times, hundreds of thousands of times a year, in fact. And water companies have not been doing enough, particularly these 3, to deal with it. This fine has been welcomed by the Environment Secretary, Steve Reed. I think we can see what he said this morning. He said, "I welcome Ofwat's actions today. The unacceptable destruction of our waterways should never have been allowed, and it is right that those responsible for illegally polluting our rivers, lakes and seas face the consequences." I have had some response from Yorkshire Water, who say they have been doing a great deal to address this, as they've been working with the regulator for a year, and they are disappointed. The water companies do have an opportunity to come back. They've got till 10th of September, I believe, to come back and argue the fine. They can make proposals that they might invest more to save some of this fine. The regulator tells me absolutely these fines won't come from customer bills. They're not allowed to be added onto customer bills. The money, interestingly, will go to the Treasury from these fines if they aren't reduced. And then there's this question, as you say, about the financial health of the companies, never mind the environmental health of rivers. And Thames particularly has been arguing for months, years, that the regulator should actually give it special treatment, should not fine it so heavily because it is drowning in debt, it's struggling to attract the investors it needs to make good these problems, and this will not help. But the regulator is clear. The company's board and its investors have the power to fix this. His job is to, yes, ensure the companies can operate in a way that's attractive to private investors, but it's to protect the public and protect waterways as well.
Paul Kelso, great stuff, thank you. US President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris have held discussions with their national security teams on the possibility and the specifics of an Iranian attack against Israel in the future. Our Middle East correspondent Alistair Bunkle joins us now from Jerusalem. Ali, very good morning to you. Great to have you with us on this. Is there a sense in the region that the fact we haven't seen a full response yet means it may never come, or is it a sense of people there that it's a delay to something that feels almost inevitable now?
I think everybody feels that it is inevitable. There are two things I would say about the length of time that it's taking. Firstly, if you look back at what happened in April, when Iran sent around 300 drones and missiles here, that came 13 days after the Israeli strike on the Iranian consulate building in Damascus that triggered that particular crisis. We are now a week on from the killing of the Hezbollah commander Fouad Shukr, and then a few hours later the killing of Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran. And so it feels like, you know, everybody's waiting, and they are, but actually Iran is still trying to finalise its plans, we gather, and knows the psychological advantage it gets from keeping everybody guessing.
We've seen significant extra military capabilities sent to the region by the US in particular, or is it a marginal increase from what they already had here? And how is that being interpreted, I guess, by all sides in the region?
I'd say it is a slight increase. It is also a repositioning of various military assets. So making sure that certain ships that have anti-missile, anti-ballistic capabilities, for example, are in the right places, both in terms of being able to intercept missiles, but also being out of range if they were the subject of any attack. The Americans in particular have a vast military footprint across the Middle East anyway, and so it's more a case of mobilizing that and then bringing in other coalition, this sort of informal coalition allies like the British, who have a big airbase in Cyprus not far north of here, the French as well, who were all involved last time round in April. So I think it is more a case of them also getting their ducks in a row rather than a surge of military equipment.
Ali, what's the last week or two of events done for Prime Minister Netanyahu domestically in terms of his position there and the ongoing, as we know, complicated balance he has had in terms of trying to maintain his grip on power? Have the assassinations like that of Ismail Haniyeh strengthened his cause, or are there still a lot of pressures on him that have put him in a weaker position than he'd like to be in?
Well, I think he had a boost in popularity after particularly the assassination, which Israel still hasn't claimed responsibility for publicly, but the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh, everybody assumes Israel was behind it. I think there was a boost in popularity for Netanyahu there, seen to be taking out one of the leaders of Hamas. Subsequent to that, though, there's been a lot going around, particularly in Israeli media, leaks that there is a real division now between Netanyahu and his major security chiefs, like the IDF chief of staff, the defense minister, the head of the Shin Bet intelligence agency. The Securocrats are saying there is a deal on the table for a ceasefire and hostage release deal, and that Netanyahu should take it. And by inserting, they allege, more conditions that Hamas are not going to accept, Netanyahu is effectively kiboshing any potential deal. Now, that's been playing a lot in Israeli media here, and of course that then generates an awful lot of opposition to Benjamin Netanyahu, particularly on the streets of Israel, because people think that he is the one blocking a potential deal.
Ali Bunkle, as always, thanks so much. Great to see you, our Middle East correspondent, Alistair Bunkle. So to come here on The Breakfast Show, as far-right and anti-immigration riots continue to intensify across the UK, we'll hear how the communities being targeted are dealing with them. And at 8:45, I'll be speaking to three-time Olympic gold medalist and multiple world record breaker, former professional cyclist Ed Clancy, about the hopes for Team GB and, of course, reaction to a gold medal in the cycling last night for Team GB.
I'm Mark Stone and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
Our street! Our street!
Well, the plan seems to be to head to the police station where the policeman who fired the shots was based.
And everything, you know, his memories is all gone.
In almost every corner, this town has been completely destroyed by the fire. I've witnessed the remarkable passion for politics here, but the anger too.
We have to get Trump out of the White House.
Is this the moment to reform gun laws?
You know, it's easy to go to politics.
But it's important. It's at the heart of the issue.
I get that that's where the media likes to go.
No, it's not. It's where many of the people we've talked to here like to go.
I report on the biggest stories from around the world. This is a town that is effectively encircled by the Russians. You say it's all fabrication, what's happening in Bucha?
Destroyed my nation.
We take you to the heart of stories that shape our planet. Yeah, I can hear now quite a few explosions in the distance here in Jerusalem. A very violent series of confrontations.
Ghislaine Maxwell has pleaded.
Everybody here know the truth of ISIS.
Welcome back to The Breakfast Show. Lots more still to come. We'll be talking to Team GB's one of Team GB's most decorated track cyclists. And Ed Clancy's only got 3 golds.
Yes, well, I'm still a legend.
Still one of the absolute all-time greats, but there's been so much success from Team GB on the track in recent years that, in fact, he's not the most decorated.
No, you're right
I hope
correct.
he's not watching yet. We shouldn't have needed to even caveat that whatsoever because of his extraordinary number of medals. Ed, we can't wait to talk to you. You're a complete legend, and that is still to come. First, though, I'll just end this.
Yes.
Let's have the top stories.
I have the top stories.
I hope he's not watching.
On 6. Hello, everyone. Several police officers have been injured and a police van was damaged as rival protest groups faced off in Plymouth. Now, the crowds were held apart by lines of riot police with violence breaking out as protesters threw rocks and fireworks. Now, rioters in Belfast have also been out for a second night throwing petrol bombs and missiles at police. Been hearing on the show, haven't we, how a former head of the UK's counter-terror police force has said it's time to start treating the worst of the riots as terrorism. So Neil Basu condemned those involved as bullies and cowards. The water regulator have proposed a combined fine of £168 million to 3 water companies after a series of failures. Paul Kelso had all the details on that. And we're also talking about how student protesters in Bangladesh have called for Nobel Peace Prize winner Muhammad Yunus to lead the country. This is after the Prime Minister fled to Pakistan following deadly protests. The country's army chief will meet student protest leaders as he seeks guidance on forming an interim government.
Yeah, thanks so much. Let's get more now on the riots and the impact they could have on communities and groups across the country. I'm joined now by Yunus Lunat, who's the head of employment law at Ison Harrison Solicitors. Yunus, great to see you again. Thanks for joining us. I believe you've been in touch with quite a few people, whether clients or former clients or just colleagues and friends who've been very close, if not right in the middle of where some of these riots have been taking place. What have been some of their emotions over the last week?
Good morning. Thank you for inviting me again. Really, I'm speaking from the community perspective. Mosques up and down the country, certainly. I live in Batley, and Batley is synonymous with the murder of Joe Cox, who was my MP. At the time, I was the vice chair of the mosque, and I did a lot of work, community work, in bringing those communities together. And those fears are now coming back to the fore, and the mosques in the area, certainly mosques up and down the country, are actually taking contingencies. And my concern is that at the moment, the attacks seem to be focused upon the hotels where the refugees are supposedly being housed. But my concern is, in fact, the fear of the communities are, and there's rumours flying around that certain mosques are being targeted or about to be targeted. And we saw yesterday in Birmingham where communities, because of the fact that the police resources are so stretched, communities are having to mobilise and defend their own institutions. And my concern is that things are really going out of control. Strong messages are being sent by mosque and community leaders, which I applaud, to ensure that our young people actually hold order.
It's so interesting hearing you talk about the way these rumours are flying around. Is that all on mobile devices, on social media, or is it also word of mouth? I'm just trying to gauge the extent to which you think these platforms are making things worse than perhaps they would otherwise be.
It is all social media. It is all social media. There were rumours yesterday flying around that the EDL or the far right were going to, locally up here, were going to be coming to Huddersfield and Bradford. And I got a message that certain parts of Bradford, where home visits by hospitals were having to be postponed or abandoned because there were no taxis. Taxi drivers weren't willing to do those visits. So it's having an impact on communities. It's having an impact on patients who require community treatment. And can I just come back to what at the lead to what you said? That I'm so glad that Neil Bassell has picked up on this, because I've been saying this for a week now. This is based on an ideology. This fits the narrative of terrorism. Why are the government not dealing with this as far-right terrorism? Because we know if this was Islamists, then the conversations would have been totally different. A whole host of MPs would have been piled in. We didn't hear from the Conservatives until Friday when James Clegley put a statement out. We didn't hear from Rishi Sunak, the Conservative leader, until Sunday, 5 days after these riots have been ongoing. We all know, had this been the other way around, then they'd have been lining up to make statements. What I'm asking is, where are the leaders or the community leaders, the community elders, or those that have been influencing these riots? They've all been muted. Do these fit the definitions of hate marches? Where is the famous politician who was labelling people asking for peace as hate marches? Why has she been muted? Why are they not being called to account?
So are you critical of how the government has handled this over the last week?
My criticism of the government is that in the initial stages, there was a reluctance to call this out as Islamophobia and racist. If you listen to the initial interviews by the Chief Constable of Merseyside Police on Wednesday after the Southport incidents, and then on Saturday morning after the Sunderland incidents, same with the Chief Police and Crime Commissioner for the North East, neither of them were prepared to go as far and label this as extremist, Islamophobic, and racist. They stopped at thuggish hooliganism behaviour. They were not prepared to call it out for what it was. It is now, almost a week later, that the Prime Minister is prepared to say this is far-right thuggery. He's still not using the term Islamophobia.
It's interesting because I had the Courts Minister, Heidi Alexander, on earlier, and I put this specifically to her, and she did, I think, say dangerous extremism, if I remember correctly, and I said, is this terrorism? And her response to that was to say, it's not for me to decide that, that's for the court system, for the CPS, as to whether or not they use that in particular charges of, for example, those that have been arrested. Can you understand the need for a government minister to balance things in that way?
Not really, because we all know the definition of terrorism. It's based on an ideology. It fits the legal definition of terrorism. It fits the community everyday discussions we have of terrorism. It's based on an ideology. It's been spread by an ideology. So why is it not being treated as terrorism? Look, there is a solution here. We're saying that courts, the prisons are full, there's no space. Well, the previous government spent a lot of money on Rwanda. You know, why do we send them to Rwanda? Because they don't want to live here. They don't want to live in a community. What I will say is, please do not ever preach British values. Those politicians that have been preaching British values, they have lost the right to preach about British values, because this is not about integration. This is not about British values. The communities that want to live in this country, and the Muslim communities, exhibit and espouse British values far better than any of these people. And I'll tell you, most of these people, if you ask them the names of the 4 children that were murdered in Southport, they won't even know the names of those 4 girls that were murdered in Southport.
Eunice, we're out of time here, but thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So to come here on The Breakfast Show, we'll be speaking to 3-time Olympic gold medalist and multiple world record breaker, former Team GB cyclist, Ed Clancy.
This conflict.
They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Heavy vehicle. Why only in America?
People want their country to work.
You want a job in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first. Free wherever you get your news.
Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before? Yes. Cheers. We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.
Welcome back. It's been a golden start for Team GB's cyclists. Britain's long-awaited return to the women's team sprint ended in glory. Emma Finucane, Katie Marchant and Sophie Capewell broke the world record 3 times in one night and won gold in the process. There are also high hopes for the roster of other cycling events coming up in the next couple of days. Joining us to discuss is the most decorated British cyclist in history and former Team GB star Ed Clancy, who's actually off to Paris later this afternoon himself. Ed, great to see you. Very good morning to you.
Morning to you. Thanks for having me on today. And I'm very much looking forward to my little trip to Paris later on.
Well, I'm sure you are, which is what, to enjoy the action as opposed to take part, obviously?
That's right, yeah, I'm afraid I'm old and broken now, but yeah, I'll be there just to enjoy the action, do some work with Team GB, and more than anything else, I just want to see how my old pals in the Great Britain cycling team are going to get on. As you just mentioned, it was a great start yesterday, and
three of those pals, as you said, watching last night, were we... I guess we have high hopes in the sport, which we'll come to in a moment, because Team GB's done so well in recent years, but they smashed it.
Absolutely, yeah. As you just mentioned, there was a big step change, really, in the performance of the Great Britain cycling team and Team GB, you know, when the National Lottery funding came around, and I was very fortunate to kind of ride that crest of a wave for, you know, so many Olympic cycles, and now the baton's been passed over, but it looks like they're still going, and I still work with British Cycling and the research and innovation team, and I tell you what, it's a really difficult thing to kind of maintain this gap over the leading nations. You know, if you look at football, Formula One, it's very difficult for any team to maintain dominance for a decent period of time. But yeah, I'm very pleased to say there's some great people still in the building. The performance director, Sparky's doing a great job. We've got some excellent coaches in the building now. And yeah, there's loads of new, fresh, talented, enthusiastic riders coming through. So I hope that gold medal is just the start of things to come this week.
Ed, it's Leah here. Very good morning. Great to see you, as always. Listen, I want to talk about that legacy. We spoke a lot about it at 2012, the London Olympics, and how important it is to continue that. And as you say, there's so much talent. What do you think is the success of British cycling? You mentioned the funding, you know, £300,000 pumped into the velodrome in Carmarthen. It's key, isn't it, that young people see people like you, people like Emma, visibly at the velodrome, you know, taking part in that sport.
Exactly, and I just mentioned that I was really fortunate that I came along. You know, I wasn't from a cycling family or a cycling background, and you know, like a lot of sports, you know, when I was a lad, it was very much hereditary. It was almost like this niche, fringe sport of cycling just got passed down the chain. And when I was a lad, British Cycling had this talent team, and it kind of like opened up a funnel, and it like went around schools, velodromes around the country to try and find new, exciting talent. Now, you know, eventually sort of guys like myself, we got older, we were in our 20s and 30s, and we won Olympic medals. And all of a sudden, perhaps the legacy of 2012 was there was millions and millions of inspired teenagers who are now in their 20s. And, you know, they're fully grown boys and girls, and they're ready to race bikes at the highest level. And, you know, that's part of the legacy. And I think the key point I'm trying to make is it's a spectrum. There's no point in the National Lottery or Sport England or whoever it is funding just the upper echelons of sport, because then there's no pathway. And vice versa, there's no point in funding just sort of grassroots level, as great as that is to see, because the people at the top still need, you know, the best bikes, the best skin suits, the best technology and so on. But at the moment, not just British cycling, but the whole of UK sport seems to be onto a great thing in Olympic terms. So, yeah, we'll keep our fingers crossed for that medal table later on.
Yeah, well, we certainly will, and it's been a great start, as you already alluded to. I mean, Ed, do you think it is possible to replicate the scale of success that British cycling has had in other sports? I mean, maybe we could compare it a bit to rowing a couple of decades earlier and stayed very near the top for a long period of time there. But is it applicable or possible in every single sport? Like, what are the ingredients that have made it work here that we should take away and try and apply to other areas?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. I was very fortunate that we had some great leaders. The most notable is Dave, who later became Sir David Brailsford, who went on not just to lead us through Beijing, London, Rio, but then went off to sort of head up Team Sky. Then he works in Manchester United now. He's had a great history of credibility and success in sport. And, you know, people often talk about Dave Brailsford's marginal gains philosophy, and that certainly worked. We did some excellent work in the wind tunnel with Chris Boardman, our Olympic gold medalist from 1992. And that put us, you know, a significant step ahead of the competition for a period of time. But these marginal gains have become increasingly more marginal, and we can't just bring that to the table anymore. We've got to be the best at talent scouting. We've got to be the best at overcoming adversity. We've got to be the team that kind of like stays true to our values, you know, when our back's against the wall. And it has been many times over the last 10, 15 years. And, You know, people forget there's loads of World Championships, Commonwealth Games in the middle of these Olympics, and you know, the Great Britain cycling team doesn't always succeed, but it always learns, it always reflects, it's open, it's honest, and I think it's making value-based decisions perhaps more than anything that's kept it at the top.
Well, Ed, the only final thought I have is that I hope Dave Brailsford isn't as successful at Manchester United as he was with cycling. One area where I reveal my true thoughts into sport. But Ed, a real pleasure to have you with us, and thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
And hopefully some more golds to come in the cycling. I mean, it is, again, it's amazing the extent. I don't think before 2012 I'd ever watched cycling in my life.
Yeah.
Whereas now it's one of the best sports to watch.
Yeah. It's made me feel like I want to go out cycling again.
Do you, though, immediately?
No, for real. Yeah. I really do. I've recently got into running and watching all the success of Team GB. It's like, I need to get a bike. I need to get out there.
Well, I cycle home every day from work. Yeah.
Yes, you do.
I have a little foldable bike, you know, the little mini one. So I don't want to cycle in the dark at 4 in the morning,
Sure.
so I put it in the boot and then of the taxi.
It would be good to see one of those giants of the sport on one with the really small wheels.
Yeah.
Trying to around the velodrome to see what time to go. I mean, we were meant to be talking about something else, but also Keely Hodgkinson, though, as well.
Oh, she was amazing, but dominated, didn't she?
Absolutely dominated. And
quite early
again,
on.
to see the scale of it, I always love watching a sort of long-distance runner event where their cruising speed is probably faster than our top sprint speed.
I know.
It's just insane. It is insane.
So impressive. I think the thing about all these sports as well is it's so much mind over matter, isn't it? Like, I can't imagine running for that long and finding a way to just keep going. It's just extraordinary.
It is really amazing. There was also, you know, not to give too many shout-outs to rival broadcasters, but there was such a great montage in the build-up. It got me really into it, of setting the scene for Hodgkinson and what's at stake for them individually, and it was a great moment. We're out of time. We are going to hit all the day's news to the other side at the top. We meant to tease ahead a little bit, but we'll be back in just a couple of minutes with all of the top stories, including the latest on the riots across the country. Good morning. It's 9 o'clock on today's programme. Another night of sustained violence with petrol bombs thrown at police in Belfast and police hit with bricks and fireworks in Plymouth.
After a former senior counter-terror officer said the worst of the riots should be treated as terrorism, the government's courts minister wouldn't be drawn on that, claiming it's a call for the Crown Prosecution Service.
And as those riots continue to spring up around the country, we'll talk to an expert in mob psychology about what drives some people to take part.
It's Tuesday, the 6th of August. Your headlines. In Plymouth, several police officers are injured and a police van is damaged on another night of anti-immigrant far-right violence.
How difficult is this to police tonight? Off the scale. It's off the scale today, with the resources we've got.
In Belfast, the second night of violence sees rioters throw petrol bombs and missiles at police. A huge fine of £168 million for failings at 3 water companies. The water regulator says they're prepared to fully exercise their powers.
We can fine them up to 10% of the relevant turnover. The Thames fine is 9%, and that recognises the seriousness of the breaches that we have uncovered.
Student protesters in Bangladesh call for Nobel Peace Prize winner Muhammad Yunus to lead the country after the Prime Minister flees. The full extent of failings and conditions at Wandsworth prison is revealed, highlighting a deeper problem with Britain's prison system. And traders take courage. Asian markets rebound after a day of sell-offs saw huge falls around the globe yesterday. A very good morning to you. Several police officers have been injured in Plymouth after being attacked by rioters last night. It marks yet another night of sustained violence after false information spread online about the Southport stabbings, which sparked far-right anti-immigrant disorder. Today, a former head of the UK's counter-terror police force has said it's time to start treating the worst of the riots as terrorism. More on that shortly, but first, Dan Whitehead has the latest for us from Plymouth.
They were prepared for protest, but not on this scale. For more than 4 hours, violent clashes erupted across this city, a week on from the horrors in Southport. Community anger now being felt hundreds of miles away.
There are 30 or so riot officers on either side of this main road in the centre of Plymouth. They are doing their best to keep these two groups separate as the tension rises.
At least 1,000 protesters from Stand Up to Racism and a counter-group against immigration were behind the clash.
I think it's scary what's happening in the country. The division is awful, and I think a lot of it's perpetrated by the media, twisting things.
People can come in here and just get what pensions they like. They bring their families in. We've got a system that will take care of proper legal migrants. It's the illegal migrants that we don't want here.
As night fell, the protests got more violent. At least 3 police officers were injured. Those in charge admitting this was a difficult evening.
This is not protest anymore. In my opinion, this is violence. This is sustained violence. Unfortunately, large masonry was thrown at us. Whether it was aimed at us or others or opposing groups, we don't know yet. The investigation will identify that. But yeah, three officers down. How difficult is this to police tonight? Off the scale. It's off the scale today. With the resources we've got, it's difficult.
There were 150 officers deployed in the city, but at times it didn't feel enough. The PM's promise of a standby army didn't feel deployed here tonight. Dan Whitehead, Sky News in Plymouth.
Well, Belfast also experienced the second night of unrest. Rioters threw petrol bombs at the police and and the police service of Northern Ireland warned the public to stay away from some areas of the city while they dealt with public disorder and violence on the streets. Sky News teams saw around a dozen people wearing balaclavas and masks throwing petrol bombs at armoured police vehicles. Well, there are growing calls for the worst of the riots to be treated as terrorism, including from a former head of the UK's counter-terrorism force. Today, there are concerns for the safety of immigration lawyers over whether they soon may be targeted too. Talking to us on the programme earlier, the Courts Minister, Heidi Alexander, wouldn't be drawn on whether some of the violence we've seen should be described as terrorism.
All decisions about charging will be matters for the Crown Prosecution Service, and there will clearly be a range of offences that have been committed, some very serious offences, violent disorder, rioting, I suspect, incitement to racial hatred, but those decisions are for the CPS, and as a politician I'm not going to get involved in those and pass commentary on it. What I do want to ensure, though, is that the individuals who are responsible for this absolutely disgusting and vile and totally unacceptable behaviour on our streets, and let's be honest, it is racist attacks, it is dangerous extremism and downright criminal behaviour, that they need to face consequences for their actions. Because when somebody, chooses to throw a brick at a police officer, chooses to set a building alight, they're choosing to commit a criminal offence at that point.
So you're saying it's dangerous extremism, it's violence, it's disgusting, I think you said. Is it potentially terrorism?
Well, it will be for the Crown Prosecution Service to look at all the evidence. As you will understand, there'll be a huge amount of digital evidence that the police and the CPS need to be wading through in order to build the case for the prosecution, and it will be for them to decide what the most appropriate charge is for any individual.
Murray's here to discuss all of this. Murray, I thought it was really interesting, the context she gave throughout that interview, but including then. Do you think there will be building pressure for senior government ministers, the Prime Minister, even to address this point specifically in the days ahead?
Well, I mean, Heidi Alexander was trying to say this is an issue for the CPS, the Crown Prosecution Service, and therefore she wasn't getting involved in it. But realistically, we know government can still put pressure or suggest things behind closed doors, perhaps. So I think if there was an appetite within government, there could be a way for them to voice that appetite. For now, it doesn't appear as though there is enough of an appetite to put that kind of pressure on, from the way that Heidi Alexander was responding to your questioning on whether it's time to start charging some of these rioters with terrorist offences. But nonetheless, I think it will still be something that might be in the back pocket, as it were, for if things were to get worse, if things were to get more extreme, if more and more police officers are seriously injured. We know so many have been injured over the past week when they're just trying to do their job and trying to keep the peace. And she tried to outline all the ways the government is tackling this and preparing for the kind of influx of potential prisoners, as well as the influx in the court system. She said, we've stood up 70 extra prosecutors. She talked about 567 extra prison places as well. Now, some would argue, is that going to be enough if this kind of violence goes on for a very long time, potentially the whole of August? Will that be enough space, or will they have to then do more emergency measures to free up space? But for now, she was arguing that actually the government is prepared, the public services that are engaging with some of these rioters are prepared, and she was quite adamant about the police capacity, around the police's ability to police and kind of keep order on the streets. Now, it's interesting because last night on Sky News, Dan Whitehead was speaking to a senior police officer in Plymouth on the ground, and he said it was off the scale trying to police some of those riots, and saying that it was really quite difficult with the resources that he had. Now, Heidi Alexander has, to an extent, kind of rebutted that claim, saying that the police have what they need and so far are well resourced enough. I think we can have a listen now.
It is very difficult for the police at the moment. It's very challenging, and I'd like to put on record my thanks and the thanks of the government to all the policemen and women who are policing these riots. And let's be clear, they are riots and not protest. It's sheer criminality. I know that the Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, speaks very regularly to the police chiefs, and she has been assured by the police chiefs that they have the powers and the resources that they need. You might have heard the Prime Minister yesterday talking about the standing army of specialist trained public order police officers that we made available this weekend. There's another 2,000 that are available this week, and they can be deployed to areas of greatest need.
So Heidi Alexander there trying to insist that all is well when it comes to policing capacity. And one key point I found really fascinating, and she was kind of following on from some of the rhetoric we heard from Yvette Cooper yesterday on social media giants and how they feel and the government feels that they should be doing more. So she talked about how, first of all, that they should essentially have a bit of a conscience, and even if certain aspects of the Online Safety Act haven't actually been implemented yet, social media companies should not be waiting for that. They shouldn't be waiting to be forced to do things. They should do things because they want to do the right thing. So trying to almost paint social media giants as being immoral if they don't make changes in the next few days, potentially. And she also talked about how the online world is the next frontier. Now, that was interesting because the language around this kind of war zone, as it were, that we've seen unfolding on the streets, the government slightly leaning into it when it comes to the online space, almost trying to say that there is an online war being waged when you were asking about those comments around Elon Musk. Yeah, it was sort of a hint as if to say the last government's online safety bill perhaps could have some bolt-ons or something could go further, and that's something the government might look at when they have more time and capacity to do so. Mark, great stuff, thank you. To the breaking news now this morning that the water regulators proposed a large fine towards 3 water companies after an investigation into sewage failures. Our business correspondent, Paul Kelso, is here to discuss the details of this. Paul, break down for us what was been announced.
Yeah, so we've had, this is Ofwat, the water regulator, which manages the industry. It's been looking at the issue of storm overflows and sewage running into waterways and rivers when it shouldn't. Storm overflows are the release valve, the clue's in the name. When there's an inundation, heavy rain, the alternative would be for sewage to back up into people's homes. You can, in extremis, use these overflows, which in effectively just pours straight into rivers. This, as we now know, has become routinely used by water companies when it shouldn't. Many argue that they're in breach of their licence illegal. For this, Ofwat's been looking at all the water companies. They fined 3 companies today a lot of money. Thames Water, perhaps predictably the biggest, £104 million. That's close to the biggest ever fine for a water company, close to the maximum Ofwat could levy. Yorkshire Water, £47 million, a really hefty fine. And Northumbrian, £17 million. And the regulator has said the companies have been negligent. It's a catalogue of errors. Remarkably, the regulator, the chief executive of Ofwat, David Black, told me this morning Thames Water didn't even know about 300 of the storm overflows it manages. So I think there's some shock expressed at the lack of oversight of the system. The reaction from the water companies has been this is part of a process. They've got some time to come back on these fines. They haven't actually been levied yet, so the responses from the water companies slightly reflect that. Thames Water says they're encouraged by this process. Ofwat recognises that in order to resolve these issues, we need to be able to afford to deliver any change, and that speaks to the bigger problem, particularly here with Thames, is it's in deep financial trouble. It's struggling to find investment. It's laden in debt, and at the same time as the regulator is hitting it with a big fine, that in turn potentially affects its ability to operate. So a complicated picture, but the big picture here is that water companies are being fined a lot of money for something that has disgusted the public for quite a long time.
And we did discuss, obviously, with the CEO as well about the outlook going forward and the extent to which they have all the powers that they need to really make sure there is change. I mean, certainly, at the very least, you'd say, is it's taken a long time to get to where we are.
Yeah, I mean, these investigations were opened 3 years ago. In fact, it should be said, 3 have been fined today. There are 11 monopoly water and waste companies. They're all under investigation. So there's every possibility these aren't the last fines. But it has taken an extremely long time. This is part of a slow reckoning for the water industry for its mismanagement. Many would argue it's far, far too slow, and we're just far more aware of what has been happening to our rivers, in part because of COVID. Many more people using waterways. Much of the monitoring of these storm overflows has been done by citizen scientists, as they call themselves, by citizens who are concerned. Now, one big change is every single storm overflow in Britain is monitored, and last year they revealed a 50% increase in sewage outflows. Now, there's more rain, climate changes, is a problem for the water companies. There's bigger population, there's much more hard standing, we're tarmacking more, but there's lots of issues here. But the regulator's point is the water company's job is to know this, to plan for this, and not to pour sewage into the rivers.
Paul, thank you. Time now for all of the day's other stories, and Leah's back with those.
Thank you very much, Wilfred. Well, after fears the US may be heading towards recession, markets in Asia, they've rebounded. Taiwan's stock exchange jumped following a record drop yesterday, but shed some of its gains later in the morning amid lingering concerns over the US economy and tech companies. Now, the most dramatic recovery was Japan's Nikkei, and that soared nearly 11% after it plunged by more than 12%. And it's the biggest fall since Black Monday. That was in October 1987. Student protesters in Bangladesh called for Nobel Peace Prize winner Muhammad Yunus to lead the country. This is after the Prime Minister fled to Pakistan following deadly protests. Let's speak to our India reporter, Neville Lazarus, for the very latest on this. Neville, give us a sense of the mood this morning.
Well, from jubilation and celebrations yesterday, the mood is turning a bit serious and uncertain and tense in Bangladesh. The students' unions have just taken out a statement very shortly before it came here that they have given the government, the military, a deadline of 3 p.m. till they want the parliament to be dissolved by 3 o'clock. Otherwise, they've asked their students to be ready. Now, we don't know what that means, though we know that they have been the most influential and the reason why such a large movement happened in the last few weeks, where the government of Sheikh Hasina, who was there for 15 years, won a 4th term this January, had to resign and flee the country. They are very influential. They have led an anti-reservation protest and then anti-government protest in which 300 people have died, mainly students, and the spiraling violence we've seen across the nation in the last few weeks. They have proposed the name of Muhammad Yunus. He's a 2006 Nobel Peace Prize winner. He revolutionized microfinance in the country, uplifting millions of people, especially women. He has agreed to be sort of their nominee and says that he will be coming very soon after a procedure in a European country. So at the moment, the Students' Union are saying they will not accept any other government except the ones that they have proposed, and it is quite tense. It's getting to be a bit more serious and tense now not only in the capital city Dhaka but the country.
Neville, for now, thank you very much for that update. Elsewhere, a US judge has ruled Google acted illegally to maintain a monopoly on online searches. The internet giant spent billions of dollars to be the default search method on browsers and devices in violation of antitrust laws. Well, the parent company Alphabet says it will appeal the decision. Vice President Kamala Harris is expected to name her running mate today before an appearance with her VP pick in Philadelphia. She formally secured the Democratic presidential nomination on Monday after a virtual roll call vote. No challengers put themselves forward before the deadline, and that deadline was on the 27th of July.
Lib, great stuff, thank you. Now, the full extent of failures and poor conditions at Wandsworth Prison have been revealed. An inspection earlier this year, published this morning, lays bare the shocking conditions at the troubled facility. The government says it's acting urgently, deploying extra staff and spending millions on improvements. Sabah Chowdhury has this report for us.
Surveillance surrounds Wandsworth Prison through the all-seeing gaze of CCTV. But behind these walls, the cameras capture a story of decline and decay. Mouldy walls, damaged furniture in cells, potential mouse droppings in the kitchen, and dead rats indoors. A catalogue of failures, according to a damning report by the Chief Inspector of Prisons.
Yeah, we went into Wandsworth Prison at the end of April. And I have to say, I was really shocked by what I saw walking around the jail. It was one of the most depressing inspections that I've ever been involved in. We saw prisoners locked behind their door for up to 22 hours a day, staff and prisoners just didn't know when they were going to be unlocked. We smelt cannabis everywhere around the prison, and there was just a lack of leadership, really, at every level.
Last year, there was a national manhunt after ex-soldier Daniel Khalif allegedly escaped by the underside of a van. And despite the high-profile incident, the report claims prison staff still failed to keep track of when inmates leave their cells.
Sentences have just got longer and longer and longer.
Prison reform groups are calling for drastic change.
And these are prisons that are 170, 200 years old. A prison like Wandsworth needs a significant amount of money and a significant number of people taken out of it. People go to prison for an increasing catalogue of offences and then they don't leave. So we have this burgeoning prison population.
Well, the government says it's on the case and will deploy extra specialist staff and £100 million worth of funding to help deliver these urgent improvements. But if that's enough remains another question. Clearly, the scale of the problem with our prisons is one of many in the new government's in tray. Subha Chowdhury, Sky News.
Lots more still to come on The Breakfast Show this morning. Coming up next, we'll speak to a psychologist about the science behind mob mentalities as protests across the UK continue to intensify.
I'm Mark Stone and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
Our street! Our street!
Well, the plan seems to be to head to the police station where the policeman who fired the shots was based.
And everything, his memories is all gone.
In almost every corner, this town has been completely destroyed by the fire. I've witnessed a remarkable passion for politics here, but the anger too.
We have to get Trump out of the White House.
Is this the moment to reform gun laws?
You know, it's easy to go to politics.
But it's important. It's at the heart of the issue.
I get that that's where the media likes to go.
No, it's not. It's where many of the people we've talked to here like to go. I report on the biggest stories from around the world. This is a town that is effectively encircled by the Russians. You say it's all fabrication, what's happening in Bucha?
Destroyed my nation.
We take you to the heart of stories that shape our planet. I can hear now quite a few explosions in the distance here in Jerusalem. A very violent series of confrontations.
Ghislaine Maxwell has pleaded.
Everybody here knows the truth of ISIS.
Welcome back. Well, in the wake of the riots of the last week or so, tech billionaire Elon Musk's been goading the Prime Minister using his social media platform X. Downing Street criticised tweet replies to Sakir by the Tesla owner, claiming civil war was inevitable. Earlier this week, the Home Secretary told Sky News that disinformation on social media was serving as a rocket booster to the anti-immigrant riots. Our data and forensics correspondent Tom Cheshire's been looking at precisely how.
Chaos across the country and violent, bloody results seized upon online to shift the narrative.
He needs an ambulance, so he does.
On X, formerly Twitter, the far-right influencer Tommy Robinson falsely said these men had been attacked with knives. Just half an hour later, Staffordshire police put out a statement saying, "We can confirm this information is false and no stabbings have been reported to police, despite videos fueling speculation on social media." Or Sunday in Rotherham, a far-right organisation alleged again on X that migrants inside the besieged hotel had a gun. Nothing of the sort has since been reported or stated by police, and that too was reposted by Robinson. This is real-time misinformation, events being repurposed, reshaped, almost as they happen by online influencers, in turn exacerbating the situation back on the ground.
And much of that is down to Robinson's expanded reach on X. If you look at this is his follow account on Twitter, as it was called. He was obviously not allowed to post or tweet then, and since he's been allowed back on, his followers have surged more than 200,000 over the last 30 days. And that means when it comes to a tweet like this, obviously incorrect. This is reaching many more people. This hasn't been taken down. There's been no note attached to it to warn people that this is misinformation. And some of that may be because of who's dealing with Robinson, the man who put him back on the platform, the man who owns the platform, Elon Musk, replying to this tweet, quoting Tommy Robinson. And Elon Musk has sort of doubled down on this. He wrote, "Civil war is inevitable," referring to the UK. That may explain why some of the tone online has changed. Look at this. This shows tweets related to Southport and anti-Muslim and anti-immigrant sentiment. We saw this obviously spike during the attack, and it seems to have come down. But actually, what's happened is something different. We've got this line, and this just shows general protest plus anti-Muslim, anti-immigrant sentiment. That has overtaken this line now. Southport itself being forgotten. We see that reflected finally in the types of site being targeted by protesters and rioters. You can see the type of site here. Instant red, that is responding to something. Then that mosque protest on the second day. Then immigration starts to come in green, and it becomes more of a concern. Black is general. And what we see planned ahead, if we look at the Telegram accounts we've been monitoring, this is what's planned for the next week. It's obviously a lot bigger. Not all of these may happen. This is a plan. It is not reality yet. But there is a clear focus on immigration-related sites. That is a change.
In a post on X, the Prime Minister said on Monday that he would apply criminal law online as well as offline, and that attacks on Muslim communities would not be tolerated. That prompted Musk to respond directly, saying, "Shouldn't you be concerned about attacks on all communities?" He is not backing down. This is a uniquely challenging situation, when the offline and the online worlds are colliding and shaping each other in unpredictable ways. Tom Cheshire, Sky News.
Lots more still to come here on The Breakfast Show. As far-right and anti-immigration protests continue across the UK, we'll speak to a psychologist about the science behind mob mentalities. Welcome back. As disorder, rioting and violence continue across the UK, some have questioned how much it has to do with one particular issue. Psychologists have argued that for some, the disorder has opened up an opportunity to cause chaos without the fear of repercussion due to the large numbers of group conformity and dynamics. To look at the role of mob mentality, we're joined by chartered psychologist Dr. Rachel Molitor. Thank you so much for joining us. Talk us through what mob psychology is.
Absolutely. So when it looks at mob psychology, obviously it's very different between the protest and the trigger of where this all began. But when we're looking at mob mentality and mob psychology, we're focusing on the masses. So we're focusing on the many rather than the few. And we see this very much with people who feel anonymous in a crowd, within a group, and actually they feel like they can get away with everything or anything really without repercussions from law and from potentially being seen and thought, actually, I'm going to get in trouble for this. So we can really see this social contagion, basically, which is happening. People are observing people getting away with looting, rioting, causing violence and aggression, and then going through thinking, well, if I can see other people doing it, getting away with it, then I could do it also.
So is that what you think is central to this? It's a thought that you won't necessarily be punished, as opposed to something that you felt like you might have wanted to have done for a very, very long time?
I think when it comes to the start of this and the trigger, I think that people were looking at it and they were looking at it as a reason, something to be able to come out for and to be able to protest. And we're absolutely allowed to have a freedom of protest. But I think this is very different from where we're seeing with this. People have probably wanted to be able to potentially have sort of aggressive or violent behaviours. They may have had those beforehand, but actually it's about an opportunity now to do so. So if you were to go out yourself and you were to go and cause aggression or violent behaviours or rioting or looting or whatever it may be, you will get caught for doing this because you will get found out. You are very individual, you are very secular within that. Whereas with this, you have this almost de-individuation of the identity of the people. So you see the balaclavas, you see people in mass groups, and they're going through with this anonymous, being part of a crowd, and actually following on a lot with their friends, with their peers, with their groups. So the group dynamics of this, the group conformity is a really interesting thing to note. People are going through with the similar ideas, but actually going through and exacerbating this through areas such as social media.
I was going to ask next, I mean, do you think social media's played a big part?
I think social media has played the part. And I think when it comes to social media at the moment, that's where everything is being shared. So social media actually does have its pros and its cons to situations such as this. So obviously the cons, which are the main area, is the fact that they can share, whether it be where the riots or where the looting is going to take place. They can share the time, the date, what they're going to be doing, and they can spread that quickly like wildfire. They can also do that in regards to the videos they have as well. So sharing what people are doing in different cities. And so you get copycats coming through and saying, well, actually, if they're doing it in this city, then I can now do it in another city and I can get away with it as long as I have a large enough mob to be able to do it. Now, the pros of social media is, one, it's being able to support then the general public to keep away from the area just in case something may be happening. So being able to share protective elements of that also. And also, it's very clear that people are videoing themselves on social media, showing themselves doing violent acts, showing themselves doing criminal behaviour. Now, by sharing these on social media, yes, it can cause anxiety and worry and concern within the general public, but it's also showing evidence of actually what is going on. And actually, by someone being on there on social media, if they have their face covered or not, you'll be able to see them and then be able to then hopefully get them in when they do get caught, because this is what they are trying to suggest. It's very important. If you are doing this, whether it be in person or online, you are causing a criminal act and you are hopefully going to be able to be caught out for it.
Rachel, it's Leah here. Good morning. I wondered your thoughts. I find it fascinating. We're hearing stories about people travelling miles to take part in these protests and people who wouldn't normally protest taking part. What's the psychology there?
So people who wouldn't normally take part in protests or riots or looting, obviously there's that sort of exponential behaviour at the moment. It's very much around the fear of missing out, which I find is a fabulous sort of psychological concept, obviously not so much right now, but people might feel like they're seeing other people doing something and think, well, if they're doing it, I want to be able to do it because I want to be part of the masses. So by seeing your friends doing it, if you see someone doing a really naughty behaviour and you think, actually, that's not very good, but actually through the sort of social conformity, you start to then notice people are seeing it as almost a normal. So you're starting to take away from what you see as being wrong behaviour to, well, if everyone's doing it, then it can't be that bad. And that's how we notice then this fear of missing out really increasing with more and more people doing it because their friends are doing it, or maybe there's reinforcement for doing it. So people are saying that, wow, you've done this, it's amazing. And actually then people are now doing it because they want that reinforcement. And this is also leading to something we call the echo chamber. So when people are starting to discuss what's going on, starting to share information, especially on social media, we then notice then through this echo chamber, it's almost like a Chinese whispers of events going forwards. So people will start to be able to say something in social media, what's going on, and it will just spread. And again, by spreading, it will exacerbate and it will accentuate what's really going on until you're seeing copycat events, which we are seeing now in different cities across the country.
What is your assessment on the best way to deal with it if we were to simplify things towards a sort of carrot or stick type approach? Slam down hard and put people in jail or go through those processes, or is there a warmer way to try and draw people away from potentially wanting to join riots?
I think communication is a really big skill here, and it's definitely something for those that will listen. And this is really important to note for people who are doing the protest for protesting's sake, for the sense of wanting to create change, which, as I said beforehand, we're totally allowed to have this protesting opportunity within our freedom of speech. For those, they need to have communication to see what is being done and they are being listened to. For the people who are not protesting but actually looting, rioting, having the advantage of this anonymity, then actually by cracking down on these people and saying, actually, you will not get away with this. And by having these harsher sentences and being able to put people in prison, showing them that actually they're not anonymous, by having their faces even out, from the social media, being able to show people who are out there, being able to share potentially people's faces and saying, if you know this person, please get in touch. Because if they lose that anonymity, they lose that de-individuation and start to be noted, then they're not going to want to do it. And by seeing the sentences, seeing the harsh punishments, people are going to come away from it because they will realise that actually there are consequences to their actions.
Dr. Rachel Molitor, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Now, 19-year-old Ethan Guo is on a mission to break the world record by becoming the youngest person to fly solo to all 7 continents in a small aircraft. He'll navigate inhospitable and dangerous areas of the globe, including the North Pacific, which spans more than 50,000 miles. And this all in a bid to raise $1 million for childhood cancer research. Well, Ethan joins us now. Ethan, thanks so much for joining us. So your mission is to fly around the world solo at a younger age than it's ever done before.
No, actually, I'll become the first person in history to fly to all 7 continents solo. But the main goal really is to raise $1 million to help fight cancer.
Oh, well, which I want to hear about in just a moment, but also talk to us about when and why you've become so passionate about being a pilot.
I think I always found aviation very interesting, but when I first got introduced to aviation around the age of 13, I couldn't really find a reason to pursue it. I couldn't justify pursuing it. And so I wanted to do something. I've always wanted to have a positive impact on this world. So when I was introduced at 13, I saw this as an opportunity to really have a positive impact and to use the attention garnered for something that's truly important.
Ethan, hello, it's Leah here. Lots of stops for you then in this journey: Egypt, Saudi Arabia, the Philippines. When you stop, you'll be visiting children, will you, battling cancer in those countries?
Absolutely. So I'm currently working with St. Jude Children's Hospital, and they have partners around the world. And so my main goal right now is to visit 1 or 2 hospitals in each continent, really showing that the fight against cancer is global. We're kind of in this fight together, and that it's time that we end it.
How complicated is your route, and how have you weighed up the places in each of these continents to land in?
Oh, it's definitely very, very tough. Overall, you usually have to prepare paperwork around a month or 2 in advance. You have to have all your documents ready. It's very tedious, but Antarctica is by far the most tedious. I had to reach out to so many different government organizations, so many different people. Yeah, it's 3 to 6 months of paperwork.
And what's the longest individual distance that you'll be flying? It looks like some of the videos we've shown in a single-manned aircraft. It's not sort of necessarily built for super long distance flights, presumably.
No. These flights, these airplanes are built to usually fly 3 to 5 hours, maybe 400 to 600 miles. But this plane has been modified to hold around 750 liters of fuel, which means I can fly close to 5,000 kilometers in one single run. My longest flight will be from Japan all the way to Alaska. That will be that will be over 3,000 kilometers and would take me 12 hours at least if everything goes well.
Ethan, obviously very passionate for you, this topic and this journey important for you, but any reservations, any worries? I guess what I want to ask is, how are you feeling about it all?
To be honest, there's been days where I've been scared. I actually first attempted to fly around the world last year, but I had an engine failure on my very first flight. And so that ended up delaying this trip all the way till now. But when I started this trip, I was very young. I was 13. I thought I was invincible. I was ready to take on the world. And now that I'm a bit older, I have a lot more experience. I'm still ready to take on the world, but I no longer feel like I'm invincible. So there's definitely nights where I look up at the ceiling and think about the risks, think about overcoming them, think about I am some days scared, but like I believe if you believe in something, you have to fight for it. And this is a cause I believe in, and I've decided that I'm going to fight for it to the very end.
Well, Ethan, we wish you the very best of luck, and stay safe, and come back and join us afterwards when you've done it. Good luck with raising the money.
Absolutely. I really appreciate it, guys. Thank you so much. And if you guys are interested, it's flightagainstcancer.com. Thank you.
Thanks, Ethan. Much appreciated. Still to come here on The Breakfast Show, we will be discussing the markets over the last couple of days. Massive sell-off yesterday in Asia, a bounce back today. What does it mean for European markets and indeed the US? We'll be back in a couple of minutes.
I'm Mark Stone and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
Wall Street! High Street!
Well, the plan seems to be to head to the police station where the policeman who fired the shots was based.
And everything you know, his memories is all gone.
In almost every corner, this town has been completely destroyed by the fire. I've witnessed the remarkable passion for politics here, but the anger too.
We have to get Trump out of the White House.
Is this the moment to reform gun laws?
You know, it's easy to go to politics.
But it's important. It's at the heart of the issue.
I get that that's where the media likes to go.
No, it's not. It's where many of the people we've talked to here like to go.
I report on the biggest stories from around the world. This is a town that is effectively encircled by the Russians. You say it's all fabrication, what's happening in Bucha?
Destroyed my nation.
We take you to the heart of stories that shape our planet. I can hear now quite a few explosions in the distance here in Jerusalem. A very violent series of confrontations.
Ghislaine Maxwell has pleaded.
Everybody here know the truth of ISIS.
Emirates Premium Economy.
Maybe one day all airlines will have seats like this.
Fly Emirates, fly better.
Welcome back. Global stocks have rallied after a disastrous day of steep declines yesterday, sparked by fears of a US recession. The most dramatic recovery has been Japan's Nikkei, which soared nearly 11% after plunging 12.4% on Monday in what was its biggest one-day percentage drop since October 1987. Joining me now to discuss all this, Chris Johnson, Senior Business Editor at Business Insider. Chris, great to see you. Thanks so much for joining us. Just checking in what European markets are doing as we speak. And we're up, but not to the same extent as Japan. So if Japan had a big bounce back after a massive decline yesterday, a bit more of a tepid, small bounce back for Europe.
Yes. The FTSE 100 in London is, just treading water, basically. Of course, we saw the S&P 500 and the Nasdaq in New York last night close down about 3.5% lower. It looks like they're going to regain some of those losses again this morning. But certainly, as you say, the biggest rebound has been in Japan,
And so even if there's a bit of a rebound globally today, a more pronounced rebound in Japan, still the takeaway of the last 3 or 4 trading sessions, back end of last week as well, is what? One of significant pullbacks in stock markets globally.
Yeah, there's a few different things going on here. There are still fears that the US economy could be going into recession. Some of those indicators have been flashing red for some time, but it doesn't look like, and the sell-off was sort of sparked by the disappointing jobs numbers that came in on Friday. But there was also some talk in the market yesterday about some emergency action from the Federal Reserve to stimulate the economy because it held interest rates last week. It doesn't look like that sort of action is going to be necessary. But there's also another factor is the rise in tech stocks this year. They've gone so high for certain companies like Nvidia and Microsoft and Apple. So there was a bit of fears about the spending that these companies are doing on AI as well.
So I mean, I think this is a key part of the context. It's all kind of relative. The US economy has been much stronger than, say, here. It's not expected there'll be a recession, but if people had fully priced out the chance of a recession when there's even a rising possibility, it starts to change mentality. And as you're also alluding to, stocks have done incredibly well over the last couple of years. And some kind of pullback off those highs, which were hit only last month, is actually part and parcel of what you'd expect.
Exactly, yeah. Like Nvidia, the company that no one had ever heard of a year ago, which makes the chips that are crucial for the AI revolution. Its stock certainly has fallen about 20% in the past month, but it's still up about 100% over the past since the beginning of the year. So yeah, there's I think some people think the valuations for some of these companies had gone too high. So it's not terribly surprising maybe to see a bit of a sell-off for some of these.
And what central banks are doing is also a huge factor in all of this. And clearly last week, the Bank of England did decide to cut interest rates. As you've already alluded to, the Federal Reserve in the US decided not to yet. To what extent does that suggest that the Bank of England is a bit further ahead of the curve? Andrew Bailey's being quite cautious and sensible in that sense, in that mindset.
Yeah, I mean that's there had been expectations that the Bank of England would take some action, and indeed there was an expectation that the Fed would cut last week. I think what this means, this market sell-off means, is that a cut next month in September is bolted on, whether that is a 0.25 or 0.5 percentage point cut remains to be seen. But that's what certainly some analysts are pricing in a series of cuts in the next few months from the Fed,
Chris Johnson, thanks so much for joining us. Very much appreciated. And just a reminder, Asian markets, which had declined sharply yesterday, bounced back today, although really it was Japan that led that bounce back, a more isolated bounce back, and that's been carrying out across European traders at the moment. The French market's just lower. The FTSE's only up by 0.3%, so enjoying really a tepid bounce back, and the US market is expected to open higher today when it opens at around 2:30 p.m, albeit by no means to the same extent as it closed lower yesterday. Now, the International Olympic Committee has confirmed that the two female boxers at the centre of a gender controversy can continue to compete in Paris. The IC's been in a row with the International Boxing Association, which says the pair failed gender eligibility tests last year. Our sports correspondent Rob Harris has this story for us.
These are the boxing officials banished from the Olympics, who came to Paris anyway and brought bedlam.
Woman, why you attack me? Woman.
Stoking confusion over gender eligibility of fighters rather than providing promised clarity.
This was brought about by what happened in the ring with the Italian and Imam Khalif. I've been discussing, but stop.
This Olympic sideshow turning into a shambles. Officials and their systems in meltdown. The International Boxing Association's leader appearing from Russia to rant about the IOC. But remember, at the heart of this are two women, Lin Yong-ting and Iman Khalif. Their right to compete as women being publicly doubted.
This is a question I'm asking myself. Why now? I was greatly affected because, honestly, it wasn't an easy thing to go through at all. It was something that harms human dignity.
Khalif and Lin disqualified by the IBA during last year's World Championships, and still unverified claims over the presence of XY chromosomes. An attempt to explain only drawing more questions.
Given the fact the first tests on these two boxers were conducted in 2022, why did you wait until 2023 for the next test and the results only announced when the boxers were on for medals?
It was something new for us in the sport. So one result coming from one laboratory, the results coming out and moving on to the next competition. We were waiting for the next tournament to then do the necessary testing.
1, 2, 3, viva l'Algérie!
And at the back, Khalif's Algeria teammate arrived, dismissing gender misconceptions.
If every person betrayed like that, he will feel angry and frustrated.
This has been a chaotic news conference by a scandal-play boxing governing body with rambling attacks on Olympic officials while claiming to be protecting women's sport. Will it expose fighters who've already received so much abuse to more hatred? It went on for 2 hours.
You know, some people see this as a bit of a farce. What? This whole event today. What? Does it not seem a bit of a farce?
This all an attempt to dismantle the credibility of the Olympics, stirring more disruption before the boxers return to the ring. Rob Harris, Sky News, Paris.
Let's have a look at the weather now, and the next couple of days will bring blustery showers concentrated in the north and the west before more general rain moves in for Thursday. It's mostly fine, warm and humid now, but showers are moving into the west while patchy light rain is edging into East Anglia and the southeast. That'll become confined to eastern coastal counties by lunchtime, leaving central Britain mostly fine, but a scattering of blustery showers will take over the west. That's your weather. Well, before we leave you this morning, we've got time to have a look at a new Banksy artwork, which has appeared in West London, showing a silhouette of a goat perched on top of a wall. And we discussed this earlier. It is remarkable the way he can stealthily... I say he. Could it be a she? Do we know who Banksy is? There's a lot of rumours, aren't there?
Shrouded in secrecy.
Although, haven't people sort of uncovered who it is?
In the art world, I think, obviously, the name will be...
I think we're supposed to know now, aren't we?
Aren't we?
Unless I... Oh, gosh,
Yeah.
I'm not going to say too much.
Anyway, I don't know what the significance is one. I like Banksy.
Teetering on the edge.
Banksy
Yes.
is also the goat,
A
isn't
nation on the brink.
Oh, this is great, Mari. I'm liking where she's
You
going
didn't like
here.
what I'm coming up
Sorry,
with.
Wilfred.
Sorry, yeah, you're probably better. do you know what I also thought? I hate to say this when I watched it. If we go back to the image,
Yes.
I don't know if anyone else... I guess those are meant to be rocks that are falling.
You know.
I didn't know if it was...
Oh.
The other...
No, it's the wrong end.
Yeah.
I know, but maybe there was a wind blowing or something. I was like, what the hell's that?
You need to go and take a nap,
I think I do need to take a nap. Or I saw it too early just after I'd got up.
I suppose it's open to interpretation, so that could be possible.
Exactly.
Anything.
Exactly. We're on the brink and things aren't going perfectly at the moment.
And getting, nervous and then...
But if that is the point, if this is we're on the brink, which I think you're probably right on, Mari. I accept Leah's criticism of my suggestion and take yours. Then it's amazing how quickly he comes up with new images.
Yeah, I mean, as an artist,
ideas.
that's why it's just world-renowned, because they are impressive and they can do it like that.
There we go. On that note, we'll leave you today. Thanks so much for watching us on Breakfast. We'll be back tomorrow. Gareth's up next.